Good morning, Councillor Fry. Can you hear us in the chamber?
Morning, Leslie. Yes, I can.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We can hear you too.
Good morning and welcome to the Vancouver City Council meeting of Tuesday, July 20th. This meeting is being convened by electronic means under the updated Ministerial Order M192. If my connection is lost during any portion of this meeting, we'll recess until my connection is restored. If a council member loses connection during the voting process, staff are available to get you back online quickly. Please ensure your video is enabled to make sure we have quorum during the meeting. And if you are leaving the meeting, could you let the clerks know, because we've had some hangups during the voting process in the past. So that would be great, if especially around votes, if you let the clerks know that you're leaving the meeting and when you return, that would be great. Of course, we acknowledge we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and thank them for their generosity to all who live, work, and play on their lands. As always, city staff are awesome, and thank you so much for everything you do for everybody who lives, works, and plays on these lands. Clerk, can we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Stewart in the chair. Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor DeGenova.
Present.
Councillor Fry.
Here.
Councillor Swanson.
Here.
Councillor Hardwick is absent. Councillor Wiebe.
Present.
Counselor Boyle,
Present.
Counselor Dominato,
Present.
Counselor Bly. Oh, not on the line. Counselor Kirby-Young.
Present.
You have quorum, Mayor Stewart.
Thanks very much. Public is urged today to listen to the proceedings on the website or YouTube and to follow along at Van City Clerk on Twitter for updates. Any comments on agenda items can be sent via the website. There's a form on the website, and that link is tweeted out. Again, at Van City Clerk is the handle. And noting our long-standing commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, which seems very apt today, of course, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind council that when addressing speakers and staff, we'll avoid using gendered honorifics and instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. Today we have 3 administrative items, 1 presentation, 1 communication, 8 reports, 9 referral reports, 39 bylaws, 6 administrative motions, 5 council member motions, notice of council member motions, new business inquiries, and other matters. And the plan for today is to continue on until noon with regular council business, break at noon for lunch, back in camera, 1 to 3, and then from 3 p.m. to deal with the remainder of the agenda. I do anticipate, council, that we'll probably go past the dinner hour, just so if that's the case, we would break between 5 and 6. Pursuant to section 164.1 bracket 2 of the Vancouver Charter, public notice is hereby given that council will give consideration to amend procedure bylaw number 9756 at the council meeting on September 21st, 2021. Council is also required to meet in camera later this week. The reasons and authority under the Vancouver Charter are listed in the updated agenda. Can somebody move a motion for us to go in camera?
So moved, Councillor DeGenova.
Thank you.
Second, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. All in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Thanks very much. That carries unanimously. We have 4 sets of minutes, council. The first one is July 6th. Any corrections? Someone like to move?
So moved, Councillor Kirby.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato, seconded by Councillor Kirby-Young, I think I heard. All those in favor say yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Great, that's passed. Minutes 2 are the minutes of the public hearing of July 6th. Any corrections? Someone like to move adoption?
So moved,
So moved.
Councillor DeGenova.
Councillor DeGenova, seconded by Councillor Dominato, I think. Thanks. All in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Thanks very much. That passes unanimously. Minutes 3 are the minutes of the council meeting following the Standing Committee on Policy and Strategic Priorities meeting of July 7th and 8th. Any corrections?
So moved.
Adoption.
Thank you, Councillor Carr, seconded by Councillor DeGenova. All in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. That passes. Last one. Minutes are the public hearing of July 13th. Any corrections? Do I have a mover?
So moved, Councillor
Thank you.
DeGenova.
Thank you. Seconder?
Second, Councillor Carr.
Thank you. All in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. That passes unanimously. Thank you, council. We're now moving to the consent agenda. So if you have items you want to hold, could you please put yourself on the queue?
Mayor, a point of privilege, it's Councillor Dominato. If you
Okay.
could be on the queue, because my
Sure thing.
computer's rebooting.
Okay, you're on the queue. If anybody else wants to hold anything, please put yourself on the queue. I'm just going to read out the list now. We have communications 1, reports 1 to 7 and 9, referral reports 1 to 9 on the consent agenda for consideration. Report 8 has been withdrawn. Councillor Dominato, you wish to hold an item?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to hold Communications Report 1, changes to 2021 council meeting schedule.
Okay. I don't see anybody else on the queue for holding items. So,
Move adoption of consent agenda, Councillor
thanks for,
DeGenova.
that's right. Thanks very much. I'm just going to ask,
Second. Yeah.
thank you, Councillor Carr. I'm just going to ask if anybody wants to declare a conflict of interest on any of these items. Okay. So all in favor of adopting these items on consent, say yay.
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 Opposed, say nay. Thank you. This passes unanimously, and now I'm going to read through the considerable list of things. Just 1 second, Council. This will take me a second here. So we've held communication report 1, and we'll talk about that in a second. We have reports 1 to 7. So the report 1 is the 2021 social grants, childcare capital, and other grants. Report number 2 is community housing incentive program grants. Report number 3 is the Vancouver community sport event grants. That's the summer intake of 2021. The fourth is quarterly capital budget adjustments and closeouts. Report 5 is debenture program 2021 inaugural sustainability bond. Report number 6 is nominal lease of city-owned capital assets to Atira Women's Resource Society for the provision of a temporary women's shelter. Report 7 is a funding application to Transport Canada's Rail Safety Improvement Program for $172,000 toward the $215,000 Jellicoe Street Grade Crossing Upgrade Project. Item 8 was withdrawn. Item 9 is a contract award for contractor for Burrard Pump Station refurbishment. Okay, and I think that is it for items. Clerks, do I also read through the list of referral reports? I think I do, right?
Correct, yeah.
Thanks. Okay. We also have referral report 1, internal development application and permitting modernization task force, zoning and development bylaw amendments to enable issuance of building permit for evacuation and shoring before a development permit. Referral report 2, minor amendments to FC2 zoning district schedule. Report 3, removal of the Alma Street West Side building line north of West 4th Avenue. Item 4, CD1 rezoning for 3449 West 41st Avenue. Item referral report 5, CD1 rezoning 4426 Ninth Street. Referral report 6, CD1 rezoning on 325 West 41st Avenue. Report 7, CD1 rezoning on 357 West 41st Avenue. Item referral report 8, rezoning on 721 West 49th Avenue. And referral report 9, rezoning on 515 West 60th Avenue. Okay, those are all adopted. And now we're on to our one and only presentation. So we have a present today. Just 1 second here. Right, okay, that's right. So we have the presentation first, which is equity framework. We have Aftab Irfan, who is our Chief Equity Officer, who will present on this item. We'll have some questions and discussion after that. Thank you.
Good morning, this is Aftab here. So nice to be here this morning presenting this work on the equity framework. As most of you know, this work has been in the making for a long time. It definitely started long before I joined the city less than a year ago, and there have been many staff and community members walking alongside them who have contributed to the creation of this work long before equity got the recognition that it has now, and before we had the racial awakening that we've had in the past year. So I just want to recognize the work of all these colleagues, some of whom are not with the city anymore, some of them who might be watching this morning or following along. Thank you for the work that you've done as volunteers off the sides of your desk and as part of your job to get us to this point. I just also, before we start, wanted to say that the conversations about equity issues are conversations about identity and lived experience. And while we need a healthy discussion to get these concepts right, sometimes the conversations can be distressing, particularly for those with trauma connected with lived experience. So we do have a couple of mental health professionals standing by this morning to help if anybody following along find themselves in distress of some sort. I encourage you to please contact the staff at my office. So you can write to equityoffice@vancouver.ca, equityoffice@vancouver.ca, and they will connect you with a healthcare, with a mental health professional to just help out. I want to add our team's acknowledgement of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh to what the mayor has already said. All four of us presenting today happen to be racialized newcomers, first or second generation immigrants. And so we are doing this work as a way of coming into right relations with Indigenous people here where we live. And I think the work has huge implications for that relationship. And so we really offer it in that spirit. This morning here, but besides myself, we have two of our social planners, Mombi Mena and Nadia Carvalho, as well as the Assistant Director of Social Policy, Wilma Clark. And so this is just an overview of our presentation. I'll just summarize the recommendations we are making to Council, and then my colleagues will present on the definition of equity that we are using, which is really central to this framework we are bringing forward. We'll talk about why equity matters for the City of Vancouver, and then we'll go through the elements of what is in the equity framework and finish with some next steps and implementation points. Just very briefly, in terms of the recommendations, we are asking Council to approve the equity framework, which provides a common understanding and a united approach to equity across all city departments. That's really the purpose of it. Secondly, we are asking Council to direct the Equity Office to essentially get going with implementation, working on a benchmark and goal setting exercise in areas of focus that are identified in the framework, and then work collaboratively with departments across the city to work on actions and tracking progress. And we are planning on bringing this back to Council on an annual basis, bring updates back. And lastly, we are recommending that Council refer this framework for consideration to the Vancouver Public Library Board, Vancouver Police Board, and the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation. And I should say that staff from all three, so from the police, fire, and parks, have been involved in the creation and some of the conversations leading to this framework. So we look forward to seeing what those bodies have to say and what they would like to do with this framework as well. Okay, I am passing on to Mumbi, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Aftab. I also want to, echo my thanks to Council for this time, and also to the numerous staff who have been part of this process from the beginning. And I think the key question of what is equity has been centered to our work since the beginning, and it was important for us to define what we mean by equity to achieve that understanding, a shared understanding of what it means. So when we go into implementation, people have that grasp or a knowledge of what it is. So we've been thinking about equity as both an outcome and a process. An outcome meaning that, it's the condition that would be achieved if one's identity no longer predicted how one fares. So when we think about access, well-being, how do we make sure that people's identity no longer determine access to opportunity, to healthcare, safety? And so as an outcome is that people will be able to prosper, to have a sense of belonging and well-being regardless of their identity. And then equity as a process talks about how do we start to interrogate, to name, and to replace the practices, the policies, and the daily decisions and the assumptions that make that are part of the organization, that make part of our organizational culture. So removing barriers and addressing the harms that are caused through the processes that we take as a city. And then many have asked, we've talking about equality. So what is the difference between equality and equity? Equality really is, when we look at our society, again, we all have a desire to live in a safe environment, to have a sense of belonging, to have a sense of safety and prosperity. And previous efforts have not considered how society assigns values depending on people's identity. So previous strategies have used similar approaches and given people similar resources to be able to prosper. But as we see in the first diagram, equal resources and in universal approaches do not necessarily address the inequities, and in fact do inadvertently sometimes perpetuate the oppressions and the inequalities that they seek to address. So we're talking about equity, on the other hand, that actually does in fact see color, that sees different, and acknowledges how systems have been designed and structures have been designed to create differences. And so we need to have targeted approaches and strategies that give communities what they need to prosper and to have a sense of well-being based on where they are and how they're situated in society. And why does equity matter? I'll pass it on to Nadia.
While there are a number of qualities that define our city, Vancouver's culturally diverse population is often one of its most touted characteristics. And it is important to recognize that the Indigenous and racialized population has been approaching or over 50% for over a quarter of a century. To the right, the graph on the right shows a racial profile by population group. And it is a profile that is shaped both by history and the reverberation of history echoing through the present within our current colonial context. The equity framework is poised to assist us in being able to design and deliver services and programs and truly plan for a diverse population by recognizing how systems are creating benefit and advantage for some while disadvantaging other population groups. This work is especially crucial as we work towards addressing the major challenges that are shaping our city and deepening inequity.
So in order for us to address those challenges that Nadia has talked about, it was important for us to go back to the beginning and really understand what are the root causes of these systemic inequities that are so endemic today in our society. And colonialism is one of those systems that have, from the beginning, really shaped how society is framed today. When we think about other countries, they talk about external colonialism, where a small number of Western Europeans went into countries and took over political rule for the purpose of taking resources back to their countries. But in Canada and other Western countries, settler colonialism is what is played historically and currently, and was really about displacing Indigenous peoples from their lands, and supported by this ideology of terra or doctrine of discovery, that there were not people here, and if there were people here, they did not know what to do with their land. So by harm, by force, by violence, they displaced Indigenous peoples from their lands with the purpose of building wealth. And that was only mainly possible because of the invention of race. And what Western Europeans did is that they placed themselves, so white people were placed at the highest level of hierarchy as the most intelligent race, as the beautiful race, as the most civilized. And that allowed them to justify dispossession of Indigenous people's lands, the enslavement of African peoples, racial segregation and gender oppression, and denial of personhood and political power. And this continues to play in our society up until today. Also, another root cause of inequities is ableism, which is a system of thought and practices and belief systems that look at difference as a non-desirable thing, and especially for people with disabilities, relegating them to people who are not valuable within a capitalistic society, and relegating them to institutions and to justify abuse and disposal of people with disabilities. And so ableistic perspectives and views inform how we build our city, how we design our streets, access to different services, opportunities for various people. So these are the things that we need to start naming to daylight, and in order for us to move forward.
Locally, provincially, and nationally, colonial history has created lasting harm which has been brought into sharp relief these past few months through the discovery of thousands of unmarked children's graves at residential schools, and also by the Indigenous women and girls who have gone missing and have been murdered over the past number of decades, and who continue to go missing and be murdered. Descendants of enslaved Africans have told us directly through this process about their experience and how that experience and the ongoing anti-Black racism that they experience that continue to create disparate outcomes for their population. Charmaine Nelson, a McGill professor, has asked and is exploring what it takes to erase 200 years of history from the collective consciousness of the nation. And she and others are daylighting this chapter of Canadian history where Indigenous and Black people were enslaved in our country. This thread of decision-making, policies, practices that connect our past to our present is a crucial component of understanding our present and how we got from there to here. Next slide. This work began based on a call, We begin this work by asking a few central questions. Who is benefiting from Vancouver's strength? Who is being left behind and why? What is the role of the city? And we have many, which means we have many opportunities to influence, to leverage, to signal, and to have the courage to show at all levels of the organization bold leadership and a deep and sustained and unwavering commitment to action. And I want to mention here that this work began based on a call from the Poverty Reduction Advisory Committee to get our house in order so that our internal systems would be clear and unifying around the goal of equity, particularly as it relates to reducing poverty, so that we weren't working in silos on this issue or at cross purposes.
So what is the equity framework and how will it guide our work? So one of the things, as at the beginning of this work, before I even joined, there was already a team of staff who were working together to think about how do we actually embody what we're talking about equity as a process and an outcome. So our process of developing this framework had to be one that embodies the values that we're seeking to build and to cultivate as an organization. So we brought together external and internal groups and teams to work together in this work. And we began by having a conversation about what does it look like to walk together? What does it look like to listen differently, to learn differently, to contend over what equity means, to contend about and to really elevate the voices of staff who are marginalized and who have not experienced the city as a truly welcoming and a place where they belong. And really challenging each other. How do we sit with discomfort? How do we have honest conversations about what we need to move together in a shared vision? So we had these groups that are listed here, the city leadership team, internal advisory, staff affinity groups, and these were really important for us to start having those conversations about what supports do racialized staff need? How do we listen differently? How do we work collectively together in a way that values embodies the values that we're talking about? So the framework is a bold statement that says we're doing equity work, and it's a relationship-centered document that articulates our overarching approach to equity, provides the conceptual grounding for what our approach is, and also articulates our core commitments, as you see later on, maps out the relationship between this work and other city strategies and frameworks, identifies bold and broad priority areas, some common definitions, and some resources for doing this work. And then it was also important for us to understand what is the relationship between the equity framework and the city reconciliation framework. And given where we are on unceded lands, we articulated and together with our partners came to a shared understanding that the framework needed to be complementary and supporting, but not a replacement to reconciliation work. That work needed to continue happening.
So, of course, the equity framework is not the first or the only strategy that the city has to work around equity issues. We have also a number of what we are calling roughly identity-based strategies, some of which exist already and some of which are in development. So we've had a trans and gender diverse inclusion strategy, the women's equity strategy, and the accessibility strategy and anti-racism are coming. They're ones that are being worked on right now. We've been thinking about the metaphor of water to describe the relationship between the equity framework and these strategies, so that the equity framework, along with the reconciliation framework, that's kind of the source of water that these other strategies draw from. And then we also have this other set of strategies, which we might call functional strategies, the Healthy City Strategy, Climate Emergency Action, the Vancouver Plan. And then internally, we have departmental equity action plans that are coming on board, and some just annual departmental work plans without even going to the trouble of creating a strategy, but they're already embedded in the work of our department. So really, the equity framework and the identity-based strategies, they are not going to get implemented on their own. They're going to get implemented through these functional strategies and through some additional initiatives that complement them. So council is familiar most with the women's equity strategy, and as you know, the women's equity strategy has within it an integration of how all the different city departments that could be addressing women's issues come together. So there will be some actions for planning, there will be some actions for our service provision groups, for childcare, for example, for housing. And so as there will be some internal actions around recruitment. And so all of them together are driving us towards the goals of the equity framework. Passing it on to Wilma, I believe.
Okay, so these are the imperatives for the equity framework. There are 3 of them. So there's the justice imperative, which is, it's the right thing to do. And many of us, particularly those of us who are coming from marginalized perspective, marginalized experience, come from this perspective of it's the right thing to do. And there's also the compliance perspective, which is the legal thing to do. And of course, we have within our province, our human rights codes, our work safe codes, and so on. And we also have national and international legislation that compels us to move forward an equity initiative. And thirdly, there's the effectiveness imperative, which is strategically, as an organization, it makes sense. And it has been demonstrated to be positive for an organization in terms of our outcomes, in terms of our relationship with community, to take on an equity lens in all of our work. So together, these 3 imperatives tell us what is the right thing to do in terms of the equity lens. And I just want to talk a moment about the 4 lenses that we have developed for the equity framework. Within these 4 lenses, our goal is to move people who are in the margin to the center, to prioritize those who have been marginalized and excluded from opportunity, and to recognize that in order to move us forward in an equitable way as an organization and as a city, we actually need to move those who have been marginalized to the center. And in order to do that, we need a set of lenses that we will use across all of our processes, our services, and our policies. And the lenses that have been identified are Indigenous rights, in recognition of what has been said previously, our history of harms to Indigenous people, and recognizing their inherent rights as the first peoples of this land, and also recognizing that if we don't have equity for Indigenous people, we don't have equity for any of us. So the Indigenous right lens is a really important lens for our framework. Racial justice, and again, Nadia and Mumbi gave some really good background on the importance of racial justice, the fact that our colonial systems were based on racism, and a false racial framework that's been set up. And in order to achieve equity, we need to create that redress and also work through a lens of racial justice for all. And the third lens is intersectionality. And that lens recognizes that we have multiple identities, whether it's race, gender, ability, sexual orientation, etc. We come with that multiplicity of identity. And so how we interact with the world is not just based on one identity, it's based on all of our identities. And how the world interacts with us is the same. And so in order to move things forward in terms of an equity framework, we need to be sensitive to our multiple identities and intersectional identities. And finally, a systems orientation, we have to recognize that not only are we trying to change things individually and for individual members of society, in order to move things forward for groups, our systems overall need to change. So again, we need to focus on looking at our structures. We may need to dismantle. This is not going to be an easy process. Dismantling and rebuilding is hard work, and it takes time, and it's painful. But we need to stick to it. And we need to be looking at all of our policies, our processes, our services, and we need to have that lens of curiosity and the willingness to challenge what is so that we can move on to what could be. Just very quickly, I will start by going a little bit deeper into the Indigenous rights piece. We were very grateful that Indigenous partners pointed out for us throughout this process the need to ensure that while we are recognizing Indigenous rights, that Indigenous rights cannot be subsumed under the overall equity rights that we're talking about for others, that there is the Indigenous rights supersede the rights of others, that there are constitutionally protected rights and inherent rights of Indigenous people that need to be respected. And for that reason, while within this framework, we are using an Indigenous rights lens, we also are recognizing that the equity rights of Indigenous people need to be actioned within the City of Reconciliation framework, and that these two documents, the City of Reconciliation framework and the equity framework, are aligned documents, and that we need to move forward on actions in both of these documents together. So they both need to be prioritized. And with that, I'll move it on to Mumbi.
To Nadia. Thank you.
Oh, Nadia, thank you.
Thank you. As a city where 1 out of 2 residents are racialized and where this diversity level has remained consistent for over a quarter of a century, it is important that we do the work to uncover and name the racism that is embedded in our systems so that we can work to dismantle and rebuild these aspects of our systems. I keep coming back to that amount of time and the level of diversity in our population, because often when we don't see diversity at our leadership tables, in workforces, at decision-making tables, it's not about a pipeline issue. And as you've seen through the presentation, there's some critical questions that we ask through equity is who is at the decision-making table, who is represented, who is benefiting in our processes, and who are our processes designed to support, and do they account for the differences that we've mentioned. And I also wanted to mention that previously, so much of the struggle for Indigenous rights and racial equity is hidden. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, and other times it's been erased. And I wanted to mention that because in my lifetime, in my family's lifetime alone, there have been 3 of these national racial reckonings or awakenings. And many people don't know about them, but those calls have been pivot points in our history that have helped drive the call for organizations and institutions to address systemic racism.
And also, in addition to what Wilma talked about in terms of intersectionality, people ask us, what about gender? And what about, class, immigration, ability? And we're saying that we're taking an end-to-end approach. So really upholding Indigenous rights, and also taking what the targeted approach is the racial justice approach, while also working on gender and on accessibility, in recognition that people have intersecting identities, multiple identities, and also that multiple forms of systemic oppression, based on patriarchy, racism, ableism, classism, all come together and overlap to have unique outcomes for various people. And also in terms of a systemic approach, we need to talk about the values, the attitudes that are embedded in our systems and that form part of our organizational and organizational culture. So when we see people struggling, equity denied groups not achieving their full potential, we don't pathologize individuals and ask what is wrong with these people, but we instead examine our structure. So the groundwater problem, examining our structures, looking at our cultures, and how these play into these systemic inequities. And so these four lenses are what will guide our activities, our implementation going forward.
So in terms of our equity statements, as mentioned before, Mumby talked about equity as both an outcome and a process. Equity names and addresses systemic inequalities in favor of those groups who have been disproportionately impacted, particularly Indigenous and racialized people, but other marginalized groups as well. Equity seeks ways to transform current structures, policies, and processes, as I've mentioned before, in order to rebalance power and to make sure that people can come together in new ways and in equitable ways in the right relations with each other. And equity also amplifies and affirms the dignity and rights of all people. And this is again going back to recognizing our intersectionality and that it's informed by Indigenous knowledge and also the various worldviews that all of us bring into the work environment, and that all of these are authentic and valued. We also have a number of commitments that we're hoping today that Council will adopt. And we really need to be mindful that these are very strong commitments that we're asking Council and leadership and all city staff to commit to. So number one is a commitment to our ongoing equity work and just recognizing that it takes time and that we are committed over time. And again, to mention that it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be well worth it for ourselves and for the communities that we serve. We need to create spaces for accountable learning for all of us. We're all on a learning journey and we're all at different places on our learning journey. And we need to have that space for each other and that kindness to each other as we learn together, and recognize that we will make mistakes along the way and that we are going to be taking some risks. But again, it's worth it in terms of the outcomes that we're seeking. Representation and leadership. And this means, again, looking at our hiring practices, looking at our decision making, being curious and asking those questions, and being open for all of us in leadership levels to our staff and community at all levels, asking, why do we do these things the way we do? Can't we do them differently? Here's how it would support community better. And being really open to that. Fostering relationships across the organization and in community as we walk this journey together, how important that is to be walking it and co-creating within our staffing and within our community, and to be listening to those voices and to be on this journey together. Adequately resourcing equity work and the changes that we're talking about and the commitments that we're talking about needs to be adequately resourced if we want to see the outcomes. It can't be an off the side of the desk sort of exercise. It has to be prioritized in terms of where we're putting our resources. And finally, shared accountability. And this is recognizing our accountability across at every level of leadership, at every level of staffing, and in our work with community. We're all accountable, and that accountability will be built in to our performance measures, to our feedback from community, to how we do the work overall, we're accountable throughout the organization.
And then, of course, the question is, what do all these principles, commitments, and lenses, what do they mean when they hit the ground? What do they look like in action? And in the framework document that accompanies this presentation, we try to give as many concrete examples as possible of how might we translate some of these concepts into actions. We do also plan to do a kind of action planning exercise to make sure that we're looking comprehensively at all the areas of work that the city is engaged in. And we are using this framework that comes from something called the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Benchmarks, an international tool we are using to organize this work. And we are identifying 4 key priority areas. The first of which is a foundational area. So that looks at, do we have a strong vision, leadership? Do we have a governance structure? Do we have structures that make sense for leading this work internally? And of course, the equity framework itself is a very important foundational piece that helps us kind of level up in that area of work. The second group are internal functions, which are essentially our human resources functions. There would be things like recruitment, advancement, retention, benefits, flexibility, all of those functions. And there's definitely a lot of work we need to be doing internally, and work that's already ongoing that needs to become more visible and connected to across the organization. We have a priority area that are called the bridging functions, and they include all the other pieces that the city does that kind of hold everything together. So they include learning, communications, finance, legal, facilities development, all of the kind of behind the scene functions. And there's a lot of structures in there that could be tweaked and need to be tweaked to walk in the direction of equity. And then finally, we have our external priority areas, which are community facing functions. That's actually the majority of what the municipality does for the community and what would be visible to the community. It would be planning, parks, delivery of services, fire, all of those functions. So again, the question is, what do we need to do in those areas, and how do we change our systems in this direction? So if you can just go to the next slide. Just a little bit more introduction to this global diversity, equity, and inclusion benchmark tool. So under the 4 groups, they go into another level of detail and identify 15 categories of concrete actions. And so we've been working to modify these and try to think about how do we need to reframe them or move them around to apply to our local government context. But we are planning on essentially starting to do benchmarking, goal setting, and action planning in each of these 15 areas. So just on the next slide, we have a view of what this GDEIB tool offers, which is a description within each of those 15 categories of what it means to be a level 1 inactive, what it looks like to be reactive, level 2, what it is like to be proactive, what it is like to be a progressive or a best practice organization. And as much as we want to be a best practice organization in these areas of equity, I think when we look at it, it's in some of these areas we are actually not very advanced at all. And so what we're moving into is benchmarking in each of those categories, figuring out what is the level we're at now, and then what's the level we can be aspiring to in the next 3 to 5 years. That might be a best practice, or it might just be that we're trying to get from a level 2 to a level 3 because you actually need those in between steps on your path to becoming a best practice organization. So this is a very kind of methodical and comprehensive way of going about scaffolding our actions towards change. So if this framework is adopted, our immediate next steps are to communicate the messages to our employees for sure, and throughout the community, and then to move into a benchmarking exercise. We now also are beginning to get the results of our first employee benchmark survey, which gives us a sense of who actually works at the city and what their experiences are. We're going to pull that into our benchmarking exercise. And then we are going to set some goals and then work with departments to begin to figure out what are they already doing towards these goals and what actions are missing or need to be better aligned. We are planning on building an equity dashboard that makes the departmental goals and actions visible and allows us to do some tracking and to hold ourselves and each other accountable to move in this direction. And then finally, we are looking at how do we assess the equity goals, what indicators can we use across all these areas of actions, and what does our reporting look like? We are imagining that this equity framework needs to be refreshed probably at least every 3 years in recognition of how quickly this field of action is actually moving. So it's not a static document, but it is one that we think would be really good for informing our actions now and in the next 3 years or so. There are some financial implications, as already Wilma mentioned. This work can't be done off the sides of desks. Currently, we are looking at internal resources, prioritizing how could we work better with the resources that we have. And then in the budget ask for 2022, we would put forward what else we think is needed to do this work in a good way. And I just want to also say, again, it's been said several times in this presentation, but the equity work cannot move forward without the work on Indigenous rights. And so the reconciliation framework actually probably needs to be funded alongside or even before the equity framework. We are not going to be able to advance without that work happening in parallel and hand in hand. So we're hoping that council will also consider that as you're making your resource allocation decisions. I think that is our last slide. I'm happy to hand it back over, and then we'll respond to questions, and we might bring in a few more colleagues to help with that piece.
If I might, and Mayor Stewart, if you will indulge me, just a couple of additional comments maybe to round out. And first, I want to just echo the thanks that AFTAB started with, for certainly including AFTAB in that, but also Mumby and Nadia and Wilma and the entire team of staff at the city, as well as external partners that have been part of putting this framework together. It's difficult work that they've done over an extremely difficult period of time. And in many cases, as was indicated, individuals have stepped up outside the parameters of their day-to-day job to be part of this exercise. And I think that's really important. And I want to acknowledge that. I also, I think, as has been clearly set out, Council, that this is a foundational piece of work that now, subject to your approval, will set us on a path to build out an action plan. And that was, I think, what was anticipated by our previous city manager when he created the equity office. And I'm so pleased that we're in a position now with AFTAB and her team to really be able to support the organization in moving this work forward. I think that's critical. This is, as you know, the City of Vancouver is a very complicated organization. We have over 8,000 people that work for us doing a whole range of different jobs in very, very different contexts. So that coordination piece and really getting clear on what our priorities and ensuring we're aligned is going to be a success factor in actually making change, positive change here. That responsibility ultimately rests with me and in our office, and I'm pleased to be working with AFTAB on that. And that's really our next step now, is coming out of today and any further direction you get from us is transitioning now to development of an action plan that we'll be able to continue to keep you and the community apprised of. So again, just can't say enough, big, huge thank you to our team that's been working on this.
Thank you, team. We do have 2 speakers that have signed up for this, so I'm wondering if council's okay if we just move to the speakers who are on the line and ready to go before we move to questions from staff.
Move to suspend the rules and hear speakers.
Sure, as long as I don't have any objections, I think I'll just take it as granted, and I don't hear any objections. So thank you, Councillor Zuzanova. We can just move ahead. We have Donna Chang on the line.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Up to 5 minutes.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Donna Chang, and I'm the Executive Director of Cedar Cottage Neighborhood House. Thank you to Council, to all of the staff for this opportunity. I was born in the city of Vancouver, as were my parents. My family has been on this unceded territory since the 1870s, and I'm always been grateful for the welcome and the wisdom that the Indigenous people have always shown to me and my family. I'm here today to show support for the work that have been done by the staff and the experts in the field that Paul so eloquently described, all of us who gave our time to help develop the City of Vancouver Equity Framework. This document was created in about a 2-year span by people who knew way more than me, who listened, debated, and discussed about what and how such a framework could bring forward change for each person working in the City of Vancouver. My support for the equity framework is in the hopes that this document will do more than state simply an apology for the past wrongs, but that there is recognition that the past has created lasting losses of hope, of identity, and personhood, and that it is time for the City of Vancouver to acknowledge that the past has created deep systemic inequities that play out today in your offices, in your decisions, in all of your relationships. The City of Vancouver has the opportunity to be a leader in this work, and I am proud to have participated in the development of a document that can serve as a guide for how change can begin. I appreciate the contributions of all of my colleagues on the External Advisory Committee, the staff who worked so hard to do this work while the world collided all around us. From George Floyd to the 215 bodies of children found, we live in a time of deep reckoning, and it was the brave staff who kept the work focused to keep moving forward and not to lose this small moment that everyone was paying attention to. It is my hope that this moment will not be fleeting. And, you know, the presentation that I watched this morning just speaks to the complexity of what this is. This isn't going to be simple. But for all of us with the neighborhood houses and for the Association of Neighborhood Houses, we are here to support the equity framework, and we are prepared to make this document a tool for social change. I believe that the City of Vancouver has a gift today to really understand what it is that is in front of them, and with the support of the staff and the community, that we collectively can make a difference for all people that live in the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you have questions from councillors. I've got Councillor Kirby-Young up first. Councillor Kirby-Young?
Mayor, I believe that's the question queue for questions to staff.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Councillor Boyle, you have questions for the speaker?
I also had been on the previous queue, so can remove.
Okay. Councillor Weeb, questions for the speaker?
No, I'm on the same queue as the other councillors.
Okay, yeah, we'll just go through the speaker queue first. So thank you very much, speaker. There are no questions for you, and I'm going to move on to the next speaker. Thanks again for your participation today. We have Trudy Goals.
Good morning.
Hi,
good morning, Mayor and Council. Hi. Good morning, Mayor and Council. So my name is Trudy Goals. I am a director on the Board of Women Transforming Cities, and I'm here this morning to encourage Council to support all the recommendations in the equity framework. As you know from all of your years of working with Women Transforming Cities, we look at everything at the city with an intersectional feminist lens. It's appreciated that this framework has accurately given credit to Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw for her trailblazing work in this area. And while our role is always to look at gender and gender expression and how it intersects with all identities, we just like to remind staff not to forget this as they're going through their work and to apply this framework alongside the gender equity strategy already at the city. This framework, when applied with genuine effort, it has the ability to shift the way the City of Vancouver does all of its work. And as such, it's going to create a deep ripple effect into the community. It will require the will of council and the effort of staff to make it meaningful. And while the entire framework is outstanding, I would like to highlight some of the strong practices that we saw in this framework that really make it shine. One of them, and I heard this in the presentation this morning, is embedding it into the budget and financing, because it is really important to provide adequate resources to make sure that this work actually can get done. It really isn't something that anybody can do off the side of their desk. It's not an afterthought. By including things like the quote from the Vancouver Park Board from their reconciliation vision, it read, We consent to learn in public. We will make mistakes. We will sit with those mistakes, be transparent about them, and use them both to learn and to teach. That's a really decolonized way of approaching work, and it is a different way of approaching work, and that shows real leadership and demonstrating a commitment to doing this work differently. By recognizing this work is both process and outcome, you are truly seizing the opportunity for long-term change. We cannot do this work in the same colonial, patriarchal, and oppressive ways that we've been working and expect a different outcome. Thank you for naming this so clearly, and we are so excited to participate in this work with you. We really appreciate that you use the GDEIB as a tool for this work and publicly are reporting on the city's metrics and progress. You are ensuring this work you will remain accountable to all of this work as well. Thank you also for clearly stating that this is long-term work, and the review of this framework will be required regularly because as we learn better, we can do better. We look forward to seeing this work applied in critical areas like at the Park Board, libraries, and my favorite, the Police Board. Under this framework, we look forward to learning more about the city, how the city will collect data, and we hope it will start by implementing a disaggregated collection and reporting system. And we look forward to seeing how this work will be measured and reported so we can recognize your successful changes and help find the gaps to continue working on them. We're also looking forward to see how this work transforms the external work of the city, and in particular, how it might be applied to engaging residents in the upcoming municipal election in 2022. It is truly my pleasure to be here this morning and express my gratitude on behalf of Women Transforming Cities for the work done by the EDI team to bring this work to Council for consideration. And we offer our full support in Council's acceptance of this framework so it can be applied immediately. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today. I don't see any questions for you, so just wanted to thank you for calling in to participate. With that, Council, that's it for our registered speakers. So if you want to put yourself on the questions queue for staff, we can move to that section of the meeting. Councillor Kirby-Young, you're up first, up to 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much to all the staff at Bumby, Nadia, and Wilma, and others that have contributed to the strategy. Really appreciate it, and it's important work. Council did have an early opportunity to sort of see the evolution of the work. And at that time, I had asked the question around where are we now and what does success look like and how will we know when we've progressed and sort of moved forward. And so in that spirit, I'm really pleased to see the notation for establishing benchmarking and measurements in the report. I wonder on that note, if you can comment, I think it said 275 total benchmarks, which seems like an awful lot and very complex, as to whether or not that is overly complex in terms of measurement, or why so many of those? Why is that felt important?
Great, I can take that question. This is Aftab. And so the 200 and is it 75 or 57? So that number comes from looking at 15 categories and 5 benchmarks, if you will, or 5 levels in each category. So it's 15 times 5. What we are actually looking at is benchmarking in those 15 categories. So I think the number is probably a little bit misleading, but what we are trying to say is within each of them, say, where do we stand, and have a conversation among staff to determine what that level is. I don't imagine that we'll have that many indicators of success. I think we need to grapple with, what is a manageable number of actual indicators, numeric indicators specifically. It's not going to be that many, and I take your point. We need to be careful about the scope of this thing, that we don't bite too big.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, because I think that sometimes there's beauty and simplicity of enabling people to focus on outcomes as opposed to getting bogged down in an overly complex or detailed framework. So I appreciate that. Sometimes it's easier to rally people and communicate out how we're doing. On that note, in terms of sort of still staying on that assessment piece, you had referenced some of the diversity of different areas that this impacts, from HR to finance, et cetera. And I'm wondering if you're able to add a bit of color and share some examples of sort of some specific practices that you might see in terms of, tangible examples of how things might change. Like, would it be the ratio of diversity in HR? Would it be something like an evolved procurement policy, although we already have a social procurement policy, to try to give opportunity equity seeking groups? Could you provide some specific examples of what might be an outcome in the city's operations?
Sure. Yeah, maybe I'll take up the example of recruitment because it's easier to connect with. And so, I mean, if we look at the 5 levels that defined for recruitment, an inactive level 1 would be that we're not doing anything to recruit folks from underrepresented groups to the city. A level 2 would be that we have numeric representation goals, which we actually don't have in most areas right now. So an example of embedding these lenses would be to set some goals. And of course, we've been waiting to get the results of our employee benchmark survey so we would know where do we stand currently before we can set those goals in a meaningful way. And then as we move to a proactive level, which is a level 3, it would be things like hiring for equity competencies and not just for identities. And so getting more sophisticated in how we ask questions in the interviews, doing targeted outreach to groups that are underrepresented, working with search firms who specialize in bringing in folks from underrepresented communities, having culturally competent interviews. And if we move to the kind of progressive and best practice level, you know, I would say at the best practice, the examples become much more systemic. So it would be things like analyzing the representation at each stage of our recruitment process, how many people are actually applying versus how many are getting in, which versus how many are progressing, advancing within our system, tracking all of that to see where the bias lies currently. If we are using technology solutions, algorithms in selection, what is the bias in that? Do we begin to see the organization's reputation for equity attracting underrepresented groups? It would be that kind of thing. So yeah, in each of those areas. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I really appreciate the HR example. I wonder just for the time I have left, if you give us an example in another operational area.
Yeah, I mean, recruitment would be an internal. So I think procurement, which is the other one you referenced, is a really good example as well. And so in that area, we have some existing practices that are focusing on, for example, just looking for who is coming in as potential contractors, asking some identity questions. But we have a long way to go in facilitating the process of especially smaller consulting groups, contractors who tend to be the racialized folks, the underrepresented groups, definitely Indigenous consultants. We need to make our process a lot more straightforward for them. And so a best practice would look like, you know, actually changing the way that we are doing RFPs or having alternative ways of maybe expediting, thinking about what are the recruitments, what are the requirements for folks to be taking those up, and are they really necessary so that we can expand who we are bringing in as contractors.
Thanks so much. That's the end of the 5. Councillor Boyle, up to 5 minutes.
Thanks, and really appreciate the breadth and depth of this work and the huge amount of time and wisdom that's gone into it. My first question, I'm also interested in how we're operationalizing this work and how we can support it from council to really succeed. My first question on that front is around how the equity framework interacts with the citywide planning process.
Sure, I can take a stab at that. So, of course, the citywide planning process, or what has been called the Vancouver Plan up to now, I think it is one where there's a lot of potential to embed these lenses. We did have both the equity office and the social policy folks that you've just heard from. We have been involved in the early stages and in creation of the citywide plan, and so. You know, some examples of how these lenses would look in that process is doing consultations with racialized communities specifically, some of which has already been done. That takes the lens of seeing equity not as a let's treat everybody uniformly and exactly the same, but where are the specific needs and where do we need to do specific outreach. Another example would be taking the lens of equity as a process and paying attention to Indigenous rights. What that would mean for the citywide plan would be working relationally and at the speed of trust with the host nations, and kind of letting that process take the time that it needs to take. An example of taking the racial equity lens to land use planning might be to begin to think about designating and supporting creation or revitalization of neighborhoods that are significant to specific racial and ethnic communities. Of course, we have some examples of those, and the Vancouver plan, the citywide plan, could really strengthen that. Or an example of the system orientation lens to zoning might be to look at the east side and the west side, and I mean, what we see right now is that if you live on the east side, you have less access to parks, recreation, you have more overcrowded schools, and that's where our racialized population is concentrated and lower income population is concentrated. So anything that the citywide plan can do to disrupt those dynamics, maybe it's something like equity initiative zones, similar to what the park board has been doing, or allocating new development of more affordable housing, rental housing, higher density housing on the west side. We don't know exactly what the solutions need to be, but the choices need to get fleshed out and talked about as part of the city planning process.
Okay, thanks. All of those examples are super helpful, and I really appreciate that. I'm wondering, as these processes, the equity framework and the Vancouver plan have been proceeding kind of concurrently, and council has an update on the citywide plan tomorrow, so I can ask some of these questions there too. But is there more work to do in connecting them, and is that work happening already, or is there a role council can play in making sure that as a big project we're undertaking, the citywide plan can be an early place that we're really practicing and implementing this equity framework?
Mm-hmm. I think it would be great to ask that question tomorrow of the team that's presenting the citywide plan. We are working behind the scenes to think about the alignment. I definitely think the 3 goals that the citywide plan has put forward, the language is definitely there, and there's a lot of grounding for these lenses to come into play. And it would be great if council can keep an eye on it, and maybe we can continue to be in this kind of conversation about, are we using those lenses to their full potential? Because you're right, it's a very tangible way of bringing these principles into life.
Okay, great. My last question is, I wonder, this is such deep learning work, and I know not all councillors were able to be here this morning for the presentation. Is there going to be some opportunity maybe in the fall for council to do some training and education on equity issues, on intersectional efforts, so that we can do some of that personal work ourselves and as a team?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we are going now into the stage of needing to really translate the equity framework into ways that it can be learned and kind of embodied by different folks in the organization. And so I would imagine that, yes, that would include council as we make some of those materials, that we can bring them back here as well.
Great, I'm over time, but thank you so much for all of this work.
Councillor Weave of the 5.
Yeah, thanks so much for this work. This was an impressive presentation today. My first question is, how do we make sure that this does the system change we're hoping to? And how do we make sure that, unlike other strategies, accessible city, healthy city, colonial audits, that haven't been properly resourced and have taken longer than expected, how can we make sure that this work is properly resourced and meets the timelines and kind of breadth that was presented this morning?
I can take a stab at it, and I don't know, Paul or Sandra, if you want to add. I mean, I think the question of resourcing is one that probably sits with council as much as it sits with us. I think that what we are looking at here is a comprehensive and a very kind of transparent way of going about this work. So to be able to have a dashboard that allows us to track what are we actually doing? I mean, currently what I see is that the city is doing a lot of work on equity, but they're a little bit disjointed, and we don't actually all see the alignment, or if one falls off the radar, it would be hard to catch. So just, I think actually bringing a little bit more order and transparency to it would be really helpful for that. I wonder, Paul, if there's additional pieces from your And
yeah, thanks, Asta. I appreciate the question, Councillor. Yeah, I would agree. There is work going on. We need to coordinate it. There is a limit to how much change the organization can undertake at any one time. So I think, this notion of getting really clear on what our priorities are and executing on those. There are resources that are being spent in the organization now on this. We need to assess those and maybe reallocate them or redirect them, and then come back to you if there's gaps. But I think the first point and the key point is the one that AFTAB's raised there is coordination is a key part of that.
Okay, and what my next question is, what do we think is the biggest issue in implementing this framework or this lens? Like, what would be the biggest barrier for us to implement it, or what do you think is going to be the biggest need for change to make sure this organization moves forward with this lens?
yeah, I mean, there's probably many different ways to answer the question, but if I think about the systemic change particularly, I would say, some of what it is asking us to do is to re-examine some very fundamental things that each of us learned as children, as people going to university, within our discipline. So it is really asking us to question some of what we take for granted. And so it can be disoriented for folks who are involved in this work, and especially if you're not centrally involved and you're somewhat newer to the work. I think there's quite a bit of fear. There's some hesitancy to talk specifically about race, for example. There's a lot of anxiety that come up. So, in a way, I feel like much of the barrier internally is also psychological and is about this kind of how much are we willing to change and how much can our psychological system handle change. So it's a very human process what we are undertaking, and I think the need for resourcing is so that we can support that process well, that we can bring people along to do it well together.
Okay, my last question is, the city's been kind of embarking on a equity and well-being budget and really changing the framing of our budget process. How do you see this frame being portrayed onto our budget process in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know that we have yet a fulsome answer to that. I am in conversation with folks at finance to really begin to hash that out of how do we translate these lenses. I mean, some other municipalities have started doing a kind of equity assessment statement that comes with each initiative or budget ask as a way of allowing council to essentially do this kind of comparison or juxtaposition between a proposal and and the equity commitment. So that's a model that we could go with, but that's I feel like I'll be just a little bit premature trying to answer that in more detail. But we'll let you know, of course, as soon as we figure it out.
Of course, and I really appreciate this journey. Thanks, AFTAB.
Councillor Swanson.
Yeah, thanks so much for a great presentation. When you talk about benchmarking, does that involve getting disaggregated data?
It does, and internally we have again just began to do that this year with the first employee benchmark survey. But yes, we're asking about all the dimensions of identity.
Okay, thanks. And I'm wondering if you could explain your thinking around having the 4 lenses of indigeneity, racial justice, intersectionality, and system orientation. And then I guess things like disability, gender, and class are part of intersectionality rather than one of the lenses. So what kind of thinking goes into that kind of framing?
I'm wondering if Sandra or Mayor Claire, if you want to take this piece.
Absolutely. Sandra Singh, General Manager, Arts, Culture, and Community Services. Yes, Councillor, there, as AFTAB and Mumby presented, there are so many different dimensions to identity to consider. One of the reasons that we decided to pull out and really forward the racial justice lens is because it is an area of city work where we have not spent a lot of time in recent decades while there's lots of work for us to still do in accessibility, there's still lots of work for us to do in gender. For example, we do have efforts and work in both of those realms over the years. Racial justice was not one that we had advanced significantly, and so we decided to pull that out, and so that we could forward that for the time being as we try to address those gaps.
Okay, thanks. And for last question to AFTAB, when we get to action in your dreams, what would the action, where would we be at in say 10 years? If we actually implemented this and got it going as good as you'd like to see it?
That's a lovely question. I mean, I think, there's so many ways to think about it, but I think, for one thing, we would be in a place in 10 years or hopefully less when the demographics of our staff body and our council is more representative of our community. I think that would be a real indication that we have moved the dial. I think we would have much stronger relationship with the local nations, with the indigenous, with the urban indigenous community, and those would be relationships of trust that they would want to work with us, that we would want to work with them, that ultimately I think we would move into much more of a co-leadership model in this part of the world that we call City of Vancouver, working with the host nations. I imagine that in terms of inclusivity, if you will, or the well-being of anybody who's engaged with the city, that we would have people who kind of want to come to work, want to be part of the consultation processes, want to access city services without having to fear needing to out themselves or being made uncomfortable in the process of interacting with the city. Those would be the kinds of things that I would be dreaming. And I'm so in the kind of functional transactional pieces right now that it is almost hard to dream big enough for this. But I think we could see some real changes in how it feels to be part of the city of Vancouver and to be a resident here.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Fry, up to 5.
Yeah, thanks. And first off, AFTAB, thanks to you and the team, and also thanks to the people who contributed to this, the folks that you would have talked to and interviewed. And I know these are difficult conversations, sometimes painful conversations for folks to have, and I just want to sort of name that I know it's not easy work to get to this place. So thank you to everyone who contributed. I'm wondering if just on a kind of almost a philosophical level, we often hear folks talk about equity, in particularly in employment and hiring, and they talk about equity in juxtaposition to the sort of, some would say, dated concept of meritocracies. And I noticed that in the City of Toronto's employment equity policy, they name at the very top of their kind of policies that they'll hire and promote on the basis of merit and potential. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of elaborate on how this works within that context and those sort of, I guess, public fears that are sometimes expressed around this kind of space.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I mean, my sense of it is that actually what has happened is that we have defined merit to be too narrow in what we've done up until now. So in a way, there's nothing wrong with hiring for merit, but if we are defining merit to mean that you show up in a certain way, that you act in a certain way, and that really narrows it down to only certain people who can function in that way, or for whom it is natural to function in that way, I think we are then excluding by the definition of merit that we bring. So, if we take something like university degrees as an indication of merit, yes, for some roles, those will be very important. I think we have a whole lot of other roles where, it's kind of, we have it there because it's been negotiated with the union and because it kind of is a signal of something that societally we call merit, but it's not actually that relevant to the role that needs to be done. And maybe lived experience is a much more relevant component of merit for the role that needs to be done. So you know, I think that kind of philosophical debate will continue, but in terms of how pragmatically we work with it, what I imagine is that we can broaden, and this is already happening in some of our conversations on recruiting and advancement. How do we define excellence or merit in a way that is more inclusive itself? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that is a great answer too. I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, I guess my other sort of question, and this is a, you know, I mean, this is a largely internal organizational facing kind of document, and I think that as an organization we do have the potential for a lot of this change. And obviously there's opportunities through procurement and contracting and stuff, but how can the city of Vancouver help to lead this change and this work outside the organization throughout the city of Vancouver with, you know, small businesses and partnerships, and has there been those kind of conversations? Are there limitations through our own sort of political abilities in the Vancouver Charter and those kind of things to expanding this vision so that we are that city of reconciliation, that we are that sanctuary city, and those kind of aspirational goals that we've articulated, but how do we leverage this kind of work into that?
And maybe I'll take a stab, and Paul, you might have something to add. My sense is that yes, there's some limitations for what we can do, and I think the role of the city as a convener, as an influencer, as a partner in so many of the different initiatives is where we have some leverage. So, you know, we already actually have requests from other kind of peer organizations in the region and actually in the country to present this work to them because everybody is actually grappling with these kinds of questions. We are one of the first organizations locally to have something like an equity framework that you know really names and says this is our approach. So I think there's something in our I don't know influence on the other organizations. Some of the work that the Vancouver Economic Commission is doing, as that begins to really embed this lens of equity, it has the potential to influence businesses. So I think we need to be thinking in the partnership model and in the influence and relational model to do that work and not be totally limited by you know, of course our jurisdiction matters, but it doesn't need to limit us influencing some of the broader picture.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Bly. You're back. Councillor Bly, yeah, up to 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. And thank you, AFTAB, and to the team and all of the work that's been done to bring us to this point. It's a great presentation. I just have a question. It actually sort of continues on from Councillor Fry's questioning related to your best advice. And you, as you mentioned, you're within your first year of coming to the city of Vancouver in this role, and yet you have a wealth of experience behind that in all sorts of sectors. So I'm curious if you could give us as council your best advice in terms of how to ensure that politically we are continuing to champion this work by being united around it, and how we go forward, noting that in the recommendations, part of the guidance from council is going to be to bring this strategy, this framework to other partner organizations like the Park Board, like Vancouver Public Library, like the Vancouver Police Board. So I wonder if you could comment on that to start.
Trying to think how to respond to it and stay in my lane. You know, my kind of broad answer to it would be that I feel that mayor and council, you have a huge influence on the discourse, if you will, the way that we talk about these issues in the city and what can get said and what can't get said and what gets called out and you know you have far more influence on that than staff in a way because you are public voices. And so I think there's a balance between setting the right tone for the discourse and saying the right things in the public sphere, and then doing actually what you're doing in this process of ensuring that there's action to actually back up the commitments and the nice words that we're saying out there. So, you know, my sense is it needs to be a balance between those two things of focusing on you know, changing the language. When council uses words like you know, white supremacy, when you call it colonialism, when you call it genocide of Indigenous people, that's actually very helpful for us because it broadens the field of how we can talk about and how bold we can be. And then both by resourcing it and by holding staff accountable to make sure that actions actually happen to move us in that direction. That would be my broad answer to the question.
Okay. Okay. No, that's really helpful. And just one quick follow-up question. The equity, diversity, and inclusion page actually on the website speaks to sort of the values statement that exists. We're committed to advancing reconciliation, equity, and anti-racism for all people in Vancouver. We're taking a number of actions to fulfill these commitments. Do you see is part of that existing value statement inform the work that we see before us today?
I think that value statement has brought us to where we are today. I would imagine that if the equity framework is adopted today, that we would go on to update that statement and the way that we talk about this. I think we are a little bit more nuanced now in how we can talk about it, and can, you know, be out of the generalities and get a little bit more specific. So that would be the next step.
Okay. Okay, well, with that, I do appreciate you answering my questions. I see there's other councillors on the queue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Councillor Boyle, you're over your time.
Yeah, I was just hoping to move the report, but I'll go back on after Councillor DeGenova. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor DeGenova, up to 5 minutes for questions.
Thanks very much. I really have appreciated the presentation and all of the work that the team has done on this under Tab, your leadership. I'm wondering about, as we sort of are hearing right now, and I understand that there are different components to this. There are things to do now. There is what we have to do in the future, and there's really a strategy and a plan, and that's what we're looking at holistically. I'm wondering, is there any work that's being done right now, and I'm not saying that there's not other things going on, but as we've seen such an increase in anti-Asian hate and racism in the city of Vancouver, and the physical attacks on people, the emotional and hurtful attacks on people. In fact, I just heard of one from someone that I know yesterday, and I didn't even know what to say to that person. I was in so much shock that could have happened to them. So I'm just wondering, what are we doing at the City of Vancouver to address that? Not to say that that is the only important thing, but considering I think it's over 800% of an increase that we have.
Yes, thank you. I think I got the question before you froze. Wilma Clark, I wonder if you want to take this one.
Sure, yes, and thank you for the question. We do have actions happening around anti-racist actions and anti-hate actions. We've hired a senior planner focused on anti-racism work, and one of the things that they did very recently was brought together a group, a focus group, which was comprised of some of the community organizations that are attempting to respond to the pieces that you're speaking to, Councillor DeGenova, as well as some of our advisory committee members, to actually map out what's available right now, what's everybody hearing, what are we doing to respond. We also have had some conversations with the VPD. We're looking at our reporting that's happening, that comes into the city, that comes into them. But we've also been talking to the province and looking at what they're doing and seeing how we can work together with what Resiliency BC is doing. They're looking right now at setting up a 211 sort of website piece. And we are working closely with them on that. We are also we've also put together what we're calling a public partners and community anti-racism action working group. Right now, we have a number of public partners that are working together, and we're looking to bring in community members, again, to look at exactly what you're talking about. We also recognize that we did do some work recently where we put out some information on,
What
how to.
a privilege, Mayor. It's very difficult to hear staff.
Yeah. Just got to
Sorry,
mention.
is
Yeah.
this any better?
Yeah, you're fading in and out a bit.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So finally, I just wanted to mention that we did recently put out a piece on bystander awareness and training, and we have that information on our website. And we are trying to update information to community on our website regularly. We are trying as well to do a much better job of integrating information that comes in through 311, where we learn of racist incidents happening and can forward them to appropriate resources.
Thanks so much. I just have one other follow-up question to that is, are you actually working also, I understand the different groups that you've talked about, and it's really helpful information. I didn't realize that some of this was going on. Are you working in specific cultural groups in communities throughout our city to speak to leaders that could get this message out to people who traditionally might feel ashamed or might not report these things that are happening to them?
Yes.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we definitely are. We are very connected in through a number of distribution lists that we have through our grants program, through our work that we were doing with immigrant communities. We have a distribution list for that work as well, so we use those regularly. We have hired 2 planners recently. One's very specifically focused on cultural redress and anti-racism with the Black community, and another specifically focused on anti-racism and cultural redress with the South Asian community. We have a Chinatown transformation team that's also deeply engaged in some of this work. So yes, we are.
Thank you.
That's my time.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Boyle, you can move it now, I think.
Yes, thanks. I'd be happy to move the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I'll put us on a main queue. If folks want to speak to this item, Councillor Boyle, up to 5 minutes, whenever you're ready.
Thanks. I'll be brief, but just to echo a huge thank you for all of the work that's gone into this on the staff end across so many staff teams, as well as the significant community engagement and community input that went into it. I think this is really an incredibly important and transformative process, and I hope that we as council in leadership positions really understand and remain committed to it in all of the ways that are needed to ensure that it's adequately resourced and adequately supported, that we are supporting it being a kind of bedrock for all of our large and small initiatives like the Vancouver plan, and that we can continue to be trained and do the learning around this work so that we can be strong advocates of moving it forward. And again, we'll just say a deep gratitude to the staff who are doing this work. It's difficult and sticky and so important, and we are lucky to have that leadership in helping us figure this learning out and shift a big institution with a lot of historic wrongs to correct and learn from in moving to a better place. So I'm really very happy to see it move forward and to be able to continue championing it in all the ways that may be needed.
Thank you. Councillor Swanson, up to 5.
Yeah, also my thanks to the staff for this. I'm really hoping that our city communication people will be able to try and get it out more broadly, so it's not just us council folks that are reading it. I thought it was a really good report. And I'm really hoping that we can implement some of this equity in the Vancouver plan. That would be so important. So yeah, that's it for me. Just thanks and totally support this.
Thank you. I put myself on the queue, so Councillor Boyle, you're the deputy mayor for this month. Would you be able to take over while I join the debate?
Yes, happy to, Mayor, and you are up next, so you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Council, this is really important work, and thanks to all the staff that are doing this. I have to say, you know, I've just learned so much in the last year about the work that needs to be done and the work that's being done. And how hard this is, but how necessary it is. So I think I'm glad that we're coming at this at council. I mean, I've spent the last year working on this at police board, and I have to say that I think that with that organization, we've turned a corner, and you know, looking forward now to working more together in terms of addressing systemic racism, both at the board level and within the VPD, but all organizations within the city need to both acknowledge and then address this work. A lot of times organizations have been doing this work, but haven't named it or made it clear to the public this work is undergoing. So I do think this framework is important, but also I think that we have to at times make political statements that perhaps staff, you know, the juncture between what the civil service can do and what us as elected officials can do is overlapping, but we have specific jobs to do. So to that end, I've sent a small amendment that I would like to have your permission to include with this report that we could use in our communications to the public on a wide variety of issues. So I have sent this around to you to consider. It is.
Thanks, Mayor. And I'll just, sorry to interrupt, I'll just ask the clerks to move us to an amendment queue.
Point of privilege?
Yes, point of privilege.
I'm just looking for the emailed amendment. Could you tell me when it came in? Just not seeing it here.
Received it this morning, but can look it up. I received it at 9:21 a.m.
Okay, thank you.
So I can read it.
Yes. Go ahead, Mayor. Thanks.
I could made a seconder for this, but the city of Vancouver acknowledges the existence of systemic racism, colonial legacies, and inequities in our city, civic administration, and council. And we commit to listening and learning from affected communities as we continue to reimagine and redesign all systems that disadvantage equity-denied people in our city. It's a short preamble, but I have noticed them in the work that's been done by the City of Calgary, by now the Vancouver Police Board, other organizations that are actively undertaking this work. So I thought it would be a good idea to add it to our document as well. So
happy to second it.
Second.
Thanks. I heard Councillor Fry as a seconder. So Council, we are now on an amendment queue with a seconded amendment. And Councillor Kirby-Young, you are up next to speak to the amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I wonder if I could ask a question through you of the mover.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And further to the conversation earlier on the overall report and specifically on this amendment, and you made a reference that sometimes it's important to make political statements and reference the VPD and sort of acknowledging systemic racism. Now, I'm wondering if in your role, if you anticipate through this rejoining sort of the mayor's full traditional responsibilities on the police board and supporting that work through those means, or if you intend to remain at arm's length.
And I will assume that that's a point of information, Councillor Kirby-Young, to the mover.
That's why I had a question for you to the mover.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
go ahead if you'd like, Mayor.
Sure. I have never stepped away from my my police act duties in the as assigned by the board, and look forward to chairing the meeting this Thursday.
Okay, I understood, but perhaps you could clarify as a follow-up, if I might, on that point of information. I understood that you had said that your duties that you felt that you couldn't disclose that you publicly stated in the media. So I guess I'm asking in the spirit of how much we're going to be able to work together as one of the key city departments in furthering this work.
Oh, I again fully working with police board and actually have been texting back and forth with board members today about various procedural matters. So we're just, I was unable to attend the last board meeting due to council business, but otherwise I've been fully active in my Police Act defined duties.
Okay, so just it was just as a spokesperson component.
Which is not a Police Act defined duty.
Okay, just trying to get a sense of how we would support this work moving forward. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Is that all for you, Councillor Kirby-Young?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Councillor Bly, you are next.
Thanks very much. I have a question actually related to the mayor's comments, which I actually really do appreciate sort of context ongoing in terms of how the mayor is chair of the police board, as well as the city of Vancouver and the Vancouver Police Board itself, with the Vancouver Police Department, are continuing to work on this issue. I really hear that and appreciate the comments. I just wonder if I could ask AFTAB a point of information, and I'll ask it first. You can see if that's appropriate, just to define the difference between systemic racism and structural racism, if there is any.
Yes, happy to direct that to staff as a point of information.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would say it's somewhat of a contested question. That it's not, depending on who you're asking, you might get something a little bit different. The way that I understand it is that we might think of systemic racism or systemic oppression as kind of the broader umbrella under which structural sits. So the structural racism, let's say, would be what we have in our policies, in our kind of official processes and procedures that lead to racist outcomes. System is a little bit broader than that, so it includes all of our structures. It also includes things like our culture and how do we relate to each other as individuals. So that's how I see it. I don't think that it's a universally held definition. And the two terms do get changed, do get used rather interchangeably, but definitely when we're talking about structures, we're talking about those, quite solid, almost like legislated yeah, the ones that we can formally rely on more often. And systems to me means something a little bit bigger.
Okay.
Does that help?
Okay, that is really helpful actually. And so with that, I mean, I think that, and I appreciate the responses, that it's just important for us as this work is evolving and expanding across all sectors in Vancouver, in our country beyond. I think it's just important that we continually test assumptions around understanding our understandings, definitions, language, because it is moving quite rapidly. And so I just appreciate the information that AFTAB has provided, and we'll be supporting the recommendation, noting that there is a discerning difference between taking steps to address structural racism and then supporting this framework that is naming in this particular amendment as systemic racism, and that there's a difference. And I think it's up to us as counselors, but up to all to continue to ask questions and educate ourselves on what all these differences really mean as we move forward towards a more equitable society at the end of the day. So my hope is by supporting this, we're really taking all of the politics out of this discussion, which for me, it really doesn't belong here anyways, and just endorsing the equity framework as it is. So I will be supporting the amendment and appreciate it being brought forward.
Thank you, Councillor Bly. And seeing no other speakers on the list, I'll ask the clerks to move us to a vote on this amendment from Mayor Stewart. That amendment passes with none in opposition. And so we'll move back to the amended motion, and I will hand the chair back to the mayor if you'll take it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Council, for that. I'll move on to Councillor Kirby-Young for debate.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to really reflect and appreciate the work done towards this equity framework, and it's a milestone, but it's also a beginning. I think it's a starting point, and I appreciated the comments from our Chief Equity Officer in presenting that said that it's a process as well as an outcome, and so for me, it's really an evolution of the way of doing things. So it's not just the what we do, but it's also the how we do it, and I think that that's sort of an important observation and a sort of a takeaway for me this morning, that this is really about sort of evolving our thinking, mindset, philosophy, and approach to how we fulfill the responsibilities that we have as a city, so that we are engaging and involving and lifting up all the residents of Vancouver. And so I think that's obviously important work, obviously particularly topical and sort of heightened, I think, emotionally in people's minds now with a number of the things that have happened, such as the discovery in Kamloops and sort of the struggles that we've seen people and various folks have during the pandemic, as well as racism. And it just seems that there has been such a rise in really challenging and sort of troubling situations and the impact on people and the discord, I think. So one of my hopes as well for an equity framework is that it can help to foster an actually productive dialogue across peoples that will help to move us forward. Because I think one of the biggest concerns that I have at this moment in time, I think it's happening, beyond Vancouver and certainly across the country and other places, but certainly in our city, which is our focus and our responsibility, is how dissonant and destructive a lot of the discord is that's happening now, and not providing a real opportunity to have a number of those conversations and put voices forward and for people to learn and discover and ask questions. And we do have to, I think, have also mentioned that, make space for that, and not sort of make people feel less than when they're expressing a genuine interest in wanting to learn, but at the same time, being appreciative of others that have had to lift sort of the heavy burdens along the way. So I'm hopeful that providing a positive framework and some, championing of the work by council and some strong communication efforts around it, and all the city departments embedding this into their approach of how they deliver the services to our to people across the city, will help to move that forward. Because I actually think that's one of the biggest challenges that is facing us today, is this level of division that is creating groups and divide and othering people, as opposed to trying to acknowledge our differences, support those differences, provide paradigms where and processes where people can flourish, but not other people either. That we can kind of create one city that feels that they can belong and be part of. So that's sort of my high outcome. It's not one of those tangible. I spoke earlier about measurement, and how do we know where we are and how do we know when we've made progress? And so I recognize that that's a much more qualitative, intangible thing to measure. But for me, it's a really important outcome. So I'm hopeful that that's where some of this work will go. But I'm appreciative of the work and the fact that we're putting some definition and structure around this so that we can sort of progress and move forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We've got Councillor Dominato next.
Thank you, Mayor. And first off, thank you to AFTAB and team for the work and leadership around the development of this framework. I think it's incredibly important, and it is absolutely the right thing to do. And Councillor Kirby-Young touched on this, and I asked this question previously as part of briefings, but sometimes when we're talking about frameworks, whether it be an equity framework, diversity framework, or anything else from a policy standpoint, it's not always evident to the public what exactly that entails and what that will mean and how that translates into action. And I think that is part of the work going forward, is to show that, and that this framework will, in essence, drive change in the organization, but it will be the lens that is applied in policy development, in service delivery, And I think that part of the heavy lifting will actually be translating that into action and actually showing people what that actually looks like and how they will see change. And I'm excited by this work. I was reflecting on it in the context of my past lifetime when I was working in K-12 education policy, and we were developing a strategy to prevent bullying and violence in our schools and to foster inclusion and diversity. And we were having, as Councillor Boyle talked about, some of these sticky conversations in the context of the training we were delivering for teachers around systemic racism and how that shows up in our school system, and the fact that we can't have universal strategies. Yes, everyone is entitled to an education, but we do have to have targeted strategies, particularly for certain populations and students in our school system. When we were talking about that in the context, as our report talks about, particularly that there are inequities faced by Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities, and we were seeing that in our schools, and that young people were not feeling as safe or included, including not only Indigenous students, but also our 2S LGBTQ plus students. And so what were the steps that we needed to take to address that? And then the other piece I was reflecting on as part of the conversation, and recognizing it's in a different sector, but is healthcare. And I was meeting with a friend recently who is of South Asian descent, and asking about why they've been focusing increasingly on their health, and through that conversation learned about the higher risk that this person faces for heart disease and is predisposed to, and so it got to me thinking about how, the healthcare system, of course, this person's entitled to equal care and health, but within the healthcare system, we have to consider there are inequities and barriers that certain populations are going to face. And so we need to actually have tailored and targeted strategies to respond. And we've endorsed some measures through other motions of this council around collection of information through VCH to help inform policy, recognizing that there are particular groups and individuals who may be at higher risks. And so how do we ensure that we're addressing those inequities? So I just use that as an example because it's very tangible for me, and I think that will also help the public understand why we're doing this work and why it's so important, particularly in the day and age that we find ourselves, and really recognizing the inequities within our systems. And so I'm happy to support the work in the framework today, and very much appreciate that the work has gone into it, and the really careful articulation of both the challenges and the opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carr, up to 5.
Yes, thank you. I also want to start by thanking so much AFTAB and the whole team, everyone involved in preparing this report, and just it's just a sincere thanks for this incredible work. It's been a long task, and it's just the beginning of a journey requiring us all to be involved in the change necessary. We are a city of diversity, and I think all of us understand and know that. Over 50% of the people in Vancouver have English as a second language. We are a city of immigrants. My own family, I'm first generation. My parents were immigrants, and I grew up in East Van, where it was a neighborhood of immigrants. I have been deeply disturbed by the increase in racism that is not just happening in the city of Vancouver, but globally, and especially we've seen in the United States more recently over the past number of years. I was deeply distraught by incidents of racism that have been on the increase during the COVID pandemic. The racist language and attacks, for example, on members of the Chinese community within this city. It's shocking for me, it's frightening for me, and it is absolutely unacceptable and demands our leadership in creating change. So change starts with accepting and understanding and acknowledging that a problem exists. I thank the mayor for his amendment that does that. It will be a journey, I believe, an incredibly significant essential and actually exciting journey for all of us. And so again, thank you to all the staff who have really laid clear a path for us as we move forward into the kind of city that I've always believed Vancouver is, an accepting, welcoming, warm, and diverse city.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. That's it for speakers to this item, so I can have the clerks move this to a vote to the amended report. There we go. Thank you, Council. That's unanimous. So again, thanks to staff and speakers and to Council for that. Very much appreciate all that work and look forward to more that's to come. Okay, Council, we are now we're at 11:27, so we have about a half an hour left to continue with our business. We have the communications report was held by Councillor Dominato. Councillor Dominato, do you have questions or?
Thanks, Mayor. And yes, I held this report largely for administrative purposes is to amend it. And this is flowing from discussions with the Auditor General Recruitment Committee, on which I'm a member. And if staff could bring up the amendment, I'll speak to it briefly.
Second.
Okay, just need to, just actually need you to move the report first.
Oh, sorry, yes, I'll move the report, Mayor.
Okay, and we have a seconder, Councillor DeGenova. Okay, thanks. So now we're on a queue for the Councillor Dominato, so you have up to 5 minutes.
Also second the amendment, Mayor. Thanks.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you, Mayor. I'm just waiting for staff to bring it up. And this is just simply, it's a scheduling change, and it's that Council changed the Auditor General Recruitment Committee meeting from its scheduled date of July 26, 2021 to July 22nd, 2021 at 8:30 a.m. And that is to permit the Recruitment Committee to meet with respect to the Auditor General Recruitment in advance of a special committee meeting of Council, which is scheduled for, I believe, next Monday morning, July 26th. And so it's just staggering. We need to meet prior to that special Council meeting. And I believe the clerks have got that held in Council's schedule for next Monday.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to speak to this? Okay, so I'll move this to a vote queue on this amendment to the report. Councillor Swanson, there we go. Okay, thanks. That's unanimous, and I think I'm not sure if there's anything else. Do we need another vote on the amended report, clerks? I think we might.
Yes, correct.
Okay, anybody else want to speak to this amended report? Not, okay, we'll move to a voting queue. Thanks so much. That's passed unanimously. Thank you. Clerks, I think we're on to bylaws now. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, great. So Council, we've got 38 bylaws in the agenda. Bylaws 37 and 40 have been withdrawn. So council members who are not present for the meeting related to public hearing must confirm that they have reviewed the proceedings in the meetings if they wish to vote on the enactment bylaw. So I'm just going to go through this list and just ask you if you have reviewed the information and if you will be voting. Bylaws 1, 3, and 4 are from the public hearing of July 6th. Council DeGenova, you are absent. Have you reviewed the proceedings and will you be voting on the enactments?
This was the July 6th meeting, Mayor?
July 6th, bylaws 1, 3, and 4.
I would just like to note a correction. I was not absent, Mayor. You would not let me vote on the first item, and I was not called. So I listened, but I was afraid to participate otherwise. So I wasn't in attendance. I was listening to the whole thing, and I will be voting, yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Bylaw 15 is from the public hearing of July 9th and 11th. Councillor Fry was absent. Councillor Fry, have you reviewed the proceedings? Will you be voting?
Sorry, Mayor, I haven't and I won't.
Okay, thanks. Bylaws 19, 20, and 21 are from the public hearing of July 13th. I was absent. I've reviewed and I will be voting. Anybody wish to hold? I have folks on the list. Councillor Dominato, do you wish to hold any of these for bylaws for debate, separate vote, or conflict?
No, Mayor, that was a holdover from prior.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry. Councillor Swanson?
I'd like to hold 16, 26, 27, 28, 29, 32, 33, 36, 38, and 39.
You're going to have to go a little slower because we have to have separate votes on all these. So
you can hold them all as a batch if you want. I'll just vote against them. I just want to be consistent.
okay, thanks. Clerks, can we have 2 batches of consent? Or do we have to go through each one individually? Sorry.
2 batches is fine.
Okay, thanks. So Councillor Swanson, if you could just name your numbers again so I can mark them.
16.
Okay.
26, 27, 28, 29.
Okay.
32, 33.
Okay.
36.
Okay.
38 and 39.
Okay. So we'll have the first vote. Okay, I don't see anybody else on the queue. So I need a motion. Thank you. And I'm just going to read out the numbers for the first vote, which are.
I'll second that, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. A second, bylaw 1 to 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 30, 31, 34, 35. That's on the first bit. So I think we can do yays and nays. All in favor say yay.
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 Opposed say nay. I don't hear any nays, so that's passed. Thank you very much. The second group of bylaws is 16, 26, 27, 28, 29, 32, 33, 36, 38, 39. Can I have a mover for those?
Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you.
Second, Councillor Bly.
I heard Councillor Bly second. Thank you very much. All in favor. We're actually going to have a recorded vote on this one. So I'll ask the clerks to cue the recorded votes. And we're just going to wait. I think we have to clear the last vote first. Councillors, you can just hold on here. There we go. Okay, now we're ready to vote. Great, that passes. Those bylaws pass with Councillor Swanson in opposition. Thank you so much, Council. We're finished with the bylaws. Now we're moving on to administrative motions at 11:35. We have 6. The first one is approval of form of development 1506 West 68th Avenue and 8405 Granville Street. If anybody wishes to declare a conflict of interest, just let me know verbally. Are there any questions to staff on this one? I see no one.
Move.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Thank you, Councillor DeGenova. Any discussion on this? Please put yourself on the queue. I'll move through these quite rapidly, so just shout out if I'm going too fast. So I don't see anybody else on the queue. Anybody on the queue? All those in favor of administrative motion 1, say yay.
Yay. Yay.
Opposed, nay. Thanks very much. That passes unanimously. Admin motion 2 is on the approval form of development 3435 Sawmill Crescent. Any conflict of interest? I don't see anybody on for questions.
Move adoption, Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you. Seconder?
Second, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Any discussion? I see no one on the queue. All those in favor then say yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Thank you. That's passed as well. We're on to number 3. Approval of form of development, 118 to 150 Robson Street. Any conflict of interest?
Move adoption.
Okay, I don't see any questions, so thank you, Over. Thank you, Councillor Carr. Any discussion? I see none. All those in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. That has passed unanimously, thanks. There's 3 more of these, Council. Approval of form development 2543 Renfrew Street. Conflict, anybody? Nope. Questions to questions? See no one on the queue. Mover, please.
So moved, Councillor Dominato.
Thank you. Councillor Dejanova, I heard as a seconder. Any discussion? I see no one on the queue. All in favor, yay.
Yay.
Yay. Yay.
Opposed, nay. Great, that's passed too. We're on to number 5, approval of form of development 2603 Renfrew Street. Any conflicts? There's none. Questions to staff? See no one on the queue. Mover, please.
So moved, Councillor Dominato.
Thank you, seconder. Thank you,
Councillor Dejanova.
Councillor Weave, I heard second. All in favor, say yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Great, we're on our last one. Various guidelines and policies. Any members wish to declare a conflict? No. Questions of staff? I see none. Mover, please.
So moved, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, seconder. Anyone?
Kirby-Young.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Any discussion? I don't see any. All those in favor, yay.
Yay. Yay.
Opposed, nay. Great, thank you so much. That has passed. We are at 11:38, Council. We have 8 council member motions on the agenda today. We all council items have speakers, just so you know. The first member's motion is leave of absence. Thank you. This is for me for civic business on July 22nd from 1 to 5 and on July 29th from 9 to 12. Thank you, Councillor Dejanova, for moving. Seconder.
Boyle.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. All in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. That's done. Okay, second one is Councillor Kirby-Young, supporting community-led public safety in Mount Pleasant, and this motion is moved. So I'm going to stick you on the queue, Councillor Kirby-Young, for up to 2 minutes for an introduction to this private member's motion.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mayor. As you referenced, this motion is titled Supporting Community-Led Public Safety in Mount Pleasant, and it's an initiative that came forward from the community, from the Mount Pleasant BIA championing it, but working in conjunction with a number of different organizations in the Mount Pleasant area. And so I'm simply sort of the vehicle to bring this forward on behalf of community. As Council knows and has affirmed its support previously, even through past budget discussions, and that recognize that the community policing area is one that has provided value to neighborhoods across the city. I think Council has demonstrated that by additional budget support during the budget process last year. For those that are not as familiar, and I recognize that there's always a lot of learning that happens when motions are coming forward, that all the CPCs operate completely independently of the Vancouver Police Department. They are independent not-for-profit societies that are actually operated, staffed, and governed by volunteer members of the community. And they have the unique opportunity to leverage local knowledge of their specific neighborhoods and areas and work in partnership to support that. I think what's important to note with this one is that the groups behind this Mount Pleasant proposal really have a vision right off the get-go for this to be bridge gaps in connecting people to services, whether it's food, shelter, homelessness, and others, and that it has a broad base of support from a number of different organizations and service providers, such as, but not limited to, the Mount Pleasant Neighborhood House, Mount Pleasant Family Center, Mount Pleasant Community Center, Vancouver Crisis Center, operators of the supportive housing at Kingsway and Biltmore there, as well as a number of others. And I think councillors have received some communication about that. Should be noted that the Mount Pleasant population has been growing significantly in the city at a pretty substantive 25% increase in 5 years, and that the current CPCs under which this falls in Collingwood have a very large area to serve.
Thanks. That's 2 minutes, and now you have questions for up to 1 minute. Councillor Dejanova, go ahead, questions up to 1 minute.
Nope, yes, thank you. I do have a question. I'm wondering where you'd expect the budget to come from for this, Councillor Kirby-Young? And are there any other communities that are seeking a community policing center, or that would be in the future that this would set precedent for?
I'm not aware, to my knowledge, of other proposed new CPCs. I think that this was one that I'm aware of that was identified specifically in being underserved because the geographic area is so large in terms of Collingwood and the area that it covers.
And the budget was the question.
Yeah, I just finished the first one. I do know that the folks in Northeast Falls Creek feel that there's a bit of a gap in terms of them not fitting in neatly into a specific catchment area. So they certainly have interest in being supported by CPC. And then, yes, with respect to budget, I'm proposing it comes forward as part of the draft budget so that council can consider that along with all the other budget commitments that we have. And as you know, we have an established line item for community policing centers.
Thanks. Councillor Boyle, up to a minute.
Thanks. I'm curious to hear, given many of the examples you outlined are not traditional policing responsibilities, I'm curious to hear why you are recommending a community policing center rather than resources that address the numerous issues that you presented in a non-policing manner, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Boyle. And I would probably reframe that a little bit, say I'm not suggesting this, it's coming forth, as I mentioned, from the community and a number of different organizations, including a lot of those social service providers that are operating in the area, such as the supportive housing operators and others that see, I think, a benefit in bridging sort of between the services that they deliver and that they offer and what traditionally policing has. And so I think that was the philosophy from the community's perspective.
Thanks. I have a quick question for you, Councillor Kirby-Young. So the money for community policing centers flows through the police board. I think that's my understanding. And the operational aspects of support come from the Vancouver Police Department. So I'm just wondering why this isn't something the board would deal with first before we deal with it.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and it's a good one. I think it's because, as I mentioned earlier, that they're independent societies and they don't report to the police department. And as you mentioned, the money flows through the city, and it's simply a flow through in terms of.
Why it it flows through the board though, not through the city.
Yeah, I'm just trying to answer that. The money flows through the police department, but the police from the city in terms of the operational support. So in order to pay for their leasing, their office, et cetera, my understanding only financial support that VPD provides specifically is the assignment of an MPO.
No, it's the board though. It's not council, it's the board the money flows through.
I'm trying to answer your question, Mayor, but I'm sorry, that's my time.
Okay, Councillor Fry, up to a minute.
Yeah, just a little bit of a follow-up on the question of funding. I do recall from the 2020 budget, there was an allocation within the police budget for increasing community policing centers, and then other times it's been a separate line item. Do you know what, could you elaborate on how the budget works?
Yeah, my understanding, as I said, is that there's a specific funding amount that is targeted and approved by council for CPCs. And as referenced, and I appreciate the question, Councillor Fry, it then is provided as part of the overall VPD budget envelope, but the VPD disseminates the agreed upon amounts to the community policing centers.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Somewhat, but I think this is probably something that will be part of a robust debated budget.
Thanks so much. That's it for questions, Councillor Kirby-Young. We have a seconder for this motion.
Second, Councillor Dominato.
Okay, thanks. And we do have speakers here tomorrow. So would someone like to move a motion to
speakers, Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you. Seconder? Anybody?
Second, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. All those in favor say yay.
Yay.
Opposed say nay. Great. Okay, that's moved to the standing committee tomorrow, which starts at 9:30 a.m. Second, we're at 11:46. Motion 3 is considering youth housing needs within the city's housing strategy. Councillor Dominato, you're up for 2 minutes.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, so in brief, I've been wanting to bring this forward for some time. This is when I first got engaged with the Housing Vancouver strategy, And with the various reports back that we've had, a lot of it is largely focused on reporting on income bands and affordability. And while that is part and parcel of serving youth, and the strategy recognizes that youth, along with a number of other populations, are vulnerable and in need of housing. I have wanted us to have more of a youth-oriented lens on opportunities that might present themselves. And you'll see in the motion it talks about that youth are often overrepresented. We know in our last homeless count, it was 9% of individuals who are identified as homeless in the city of Vancouver are actually youth. Particularly youth aging out of care is a high vulnerability. They often end up disconnected from services and supports. And agencies that are supporting youth aging out of care, for instance, are looking for housing. And I spoke with one of those agencies, and they were going to hire someone to find housing, and realized it wasn't worth their investment of hiring a person to do that, because they would go and do searches and they couldn't find any affordable housing on the market that would be suitable for youth. And there are models out there. BC Housing has explored this in terms of ways to support youth, whether it be youth aging out of care, youth struggling with mental health and addictions. And I would like us to, through this motion, to indicate that this is a priority. We want to be looking more closely at this as part of our ongoing policy work. And I was very intentional of not saying, let's create a new strategy. We have a lot of strategies already in the city and the council. But to really embed this as a lens and to engage with some of these youth serving agencies around how we can collaborate and work more closely, and work with the private sector as well and private market to deliver housing that is suitable and affordable for youth, whether youth aging out of care or youth who may be vulnerable or prone or at risk of homelessness. And so that is the thrust of the motion. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks. Councillor Swanson, up to a minute.
How do you propose that working with the private sector to build housing could be affordable for youth aging out of care?
There's an opportunity to work with the private market. I mean, the private market now delivers housing. It can also be done through nonprofits. That's not the focus of the motion, is the how, it's the what. What's the outcome we want to get to? And we want to be able to enable housing that is suitable for youth. And there are different ways of doing that. There can be fully furnished homes and units. But that's a conversation. That's why it's not prescriptive. It's for staff to go do the research, to go speak with the different agencies who are involved and have ideas around this.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Dejanova, up to a minute.
Thanks. Councillor Dominato, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I don't actually have the answer to this one, and I was hoping you did. How many nonprofit organizations that serve Vancouver provide specific services such as housing, or are looking to provide housing to youth?
I don't know the exact number of agencies that are doing that, but there are a number in the city of Vancouver that deliver. I've met with Covenant, I've met with Family Services of Greater Vancouver, Kettle Directions, there's others that serve youth, but I don't have a number, Councillor DeGenova.
No worries. It's nice to know that there are some, and I know a number of them too, but was hoping maybe for more information on that. But thank you very much, and I've met with a few of them too.
Thank you. That's it for questions. So we have speakers to this one too. We need a seconder though for this.
Fry, second.
I heard Councillor Fry first. So yeah, thanks. So we have a speaker. So yes, Councillor Dejanova, move referral, seconder.
Fry.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. So that has moved to tomorrow at the standing committee meeting, starting at 9:30. Number 4 is a motion moved by Councillor Fry on ambulance services. Councillor Fry, please go ahead up to.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I think many of us were shocked and maybe even appalled at some of the delays during the heat dome effects and some of the challenges in for first responders due to a lack of ambulances. And as council will know, ambulances are tasked and funded by the province to transport patients to hospital. Police can't do this, fire can't do this. These can certainly be first responders, but the role of ambulance through the BC Emergency Health Services is to move patients to hospitals. Over the last 10 years, we have lost a significant number of ambulance stations in the city of Vancouver, to the point that we now have 4 ambulance stations for the entire city of Vancouver. Ambulance stations are where the paramedics sort of chill out and wait for the call, and where their vehicles and equipment is stored. Those 4 locations are all leased locations, one of which very close to City Hall, in the context of the Broadway plan, a single-story low-rise building that's not ideal for in the development context. Similarly, there's one at Arbutus and 14th, where we're seeing a lot of new development happening. The one in the downtown east side is got vacant lots for sale on either side of it. So there is a real risk to the viability of ambulance stations in the city of Vancouver, again, which are fully funded by the province. But in the case of leased lands on very development potential kind of spots, we do see the potential for even less ambulance services. And indeed, South Vancouver is currently served by Richmond. So it's looking at how we can, Richmond has actually introduced a co-located fire and ambulance.
Or at the 2. You do have a question now, Councillor Deschanel, up to a minute.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Fry, I'm wondering if you have spoken with, and if your motion, including both parts of the resolution, all of A and B, have been endorsed by the Ambulance Paramedics of BC, also known as QP 873.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have spoken to Troy Clifford around this very thing, and I will add that he spoke very highly of your father, who is working on.
Okay, I'd just like to please focus on the question, Councillor Fry, only because I have a moment, but I'd love to hear more about that later. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Sure. Well, only just yes, I have spoken to him,
okay.
and he's supportive, and
he's
and I will say
supportive of this.
yeah, and he brought up the work in West Vancouver, where West Vancouver is looking to co-locate a fire and ambulance station, where they'd be leasing it to the province.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Fry. Sorry to cut you off. Minute goes fast here.
Thanks, Councillor Boyle. Up to a minute.
Thanks, Councillor Fry. I appreciate all the thoughtful work you've done on this. I'm just interested to know, I assume you submitted this prior to the provincial announcement last week from Minister Dix about some work that they're doing on the file. So I'm interested to know if anything changes from that, or what work you think the province is willing to undertake on this.
Yeah, I tried to keep this from treading too much into really what provincial jurisdiction is, and focus on how we can make physical space available for ambulance stations in the city of Vancouver. And as mentioned, so Richmond has a co-located fire and ambulance station. Port Moody and Coquitlam are both doing the same, and West Vancouver is contemplating the same. So really, it's looking at without getting into the role of ambulance, which is provincial, is where we can find spaces in the city of Vancouver so that we have ambulance stations at all.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks. Don't see any other questions. Can I have a seconder for this?
Second, Councillor Dominato.
Thank you. We have speakers for this, so could I have a motion? Thank you, Councillor Deschanel. Yep, seconder.
Second, Councillor Bly.
Thank you, Councillor Bly. Okay, we've moved on. Council, we are at 5 to 11, but we're making good time here. So we just have a few. I'm wondering if folks would be open to
extend with an hour-long break after, Mayor.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, so we have a motion then to extend to finish the business of this regular council meeting, and then we would have a full hour for lunch before we reconvene in camera. However, that said, the in-camera meeting may stretch beyond 3 p.m. So, can I have a seconder for that?
Second. Councillor Bly.
Mayor, I have a point of information.
Okay. I don't know if we can do that here. I think this is debatable. So, right. So you have a point of information? Yeah. Okay. Sure. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify. It's my understanding that there are 2 new motions under new business. So we're, I guess, are we extending to do all of that work, which could take a little while?
Right to adjournment. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
All in favor of that, say yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Okay, great. We are extended. Thank you. I'll just try to move us through quickly. We have a second motion 5 from Councillor Fry. Councillor Fry, you have up to 2 minutes for, sorry, I was going to clear this queue. You go ahead and start. I'll just queue you up here.
Sure, thanks, Mayor. And really, this is me bringing this forward as council's liaison on the Vancouver City Planning Commission. I was very pleased and impressed to deliver this memo from the VCPC that was authored, I think, primarily by Gabrielle Peters and Amina Yassin, both who have really jumped in, and I would say with some very rapid response and really thoughtful considerations, in particular with a lens from an accessibility perspective and a BIPOC perspective and just a vulnerable populations perspective as to what the city of Vancouver can do, ironically from a more equity framework kind of perspective, in recognizing that we are in a climate emergency, and this sadly won't be the first or last time we experience some extreme heat and air quality issues, and likely again this summer even. So what can we do as a city? And I think there's some incredibly thoughtful and important considerations in this memo. So bring it forward, and I understand Gabrielle Peters will be speaking, as will the VCPC.
Second, Councillor Kirby-Young.
Thanks so much. We didn't have any questions for that one, so we can have a seconder. And we also have speakers to this, so could we have a seconder to hear?
Oh.
Thank you. Yep, that's fine. Referral's fine. Do we have a seconder for that?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Yay.
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 Opposed? Great, thanks very much. That's referred to tomorrow as well. Okay, now council, we have notice of council members' motions as the next point of business. And Councillor Kirby-Young, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have one notice of motion, which is titled Addressing Vancouver's Hotel Room Shortage. And that would be for the next council meeting, which is scheduled for September 21st.
Thank you. Councillor Boyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just pulling it up so I get the title correct. I have a notice of motion for the first council meeting in September entitled Acting on the Climate Emergency by Opposing the Tilbury LNG Phase 2 Expansion Project.
Okay, thank you. I am also giving notice for the September 21st council meeting establishing a Friendship Cities program in the city of Vancouver. And we have next, do you have Councillor Dejanova?
Yes, I have notice of motion, or I'm giving notice on a motion for the next meeting titled Effective and Equitable Staffing for Council.
Okay, thanks so much. And I don't see anybody else on the queue for notice of members' motions. So I'm going to move to new business. We have two already notified new business items. First is a request for leave of absence. Councillor Boyle for civic business for meetings on Thursday, July 22nd from 12 to 3:30. Thank you. Councillor Carr, seconder.
Second, Councillor Bly.
Okay, I think I heard Councillor Bly there. All in favor, yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Thanks, that's passed. The second is a request for leave of absence for Thursday, July 22nd for civic business for me from 9:30 to 12 p.m. I heard a mover. I'm not sure who it was.
Councillor
Sorry.
DeGenova.
Thank you. Seconder?
Second, Councillor Carr.
Thanks. All in favor, yay.
Yay.
Opposed, nay. Great. Thanks. That's passed. Okay, so now we're on to items of new business. Councillor Boyle? Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I circulated a new business motion as urgent business earlier this morning, as council knows, and it is a request that came out of the UNDRIP task force's first meeting last week.
Second, Councillor DeGenova.
Thank you, Councillor DeGenova. I'll just describe it for a moment to say the province is undertaking engagement and soliciting feedback from First Nations and Aboriginal groups across the province about their DRIPA action plan, their Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations are working to request within that DRIPA action plan that local governments be included to support the work that the City of Vancouver and MST have committed to engaging in on implementing UNDRIP. And I'll just say I'm bringing this forward as new business because the submission deadline for the province is July 31st, and the nations are working on a letter, drafting a letter themselves that simply asks that support for local governments and First Nations engaging in this work be included as part of the DRIPA action plan, and it was recommended that Council specifically give some direction on that front as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dejanova?
I just wanted to speak in support of this motion and thank
Okay.
Councillor Boyle for moving this forward. I, being a member of the UNDRIP committee, wanted to lend my voice to support for this. In hearing very clearly from MST that this was needed to move things forward. I also just want to remind Council that we have a very short time frame to work together with committee members, as well as the technical committee that I assume will be meeting separately, but also will be listening in and joining some of the other meetings. And I know that we need to move forward quickly with this. If we don't, I'm concerned that we won't get any work done. And I think that, you know, even just at this point, as we move forward right now, I wonder if we may even need more meetings moving forward. But that's not an issue I'm going to raise at the moment. But the funding that is outlined in Councillor Boyle's motion isn't just something that she is requesting. It is something that the entire committee has requested and discussed at length. So I just wanted to note that for Council, and it's the reason I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carr, up to 5.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I just want to also, as a member representing Council on the UNDRIP Task Force Steering Committee, that this was discussed at our first meeting, which was our only meeting to date, and certainly there was a request. I can confirm that the request was verbal, that the city support the letter that is going from the our three host nations. And that letter is really focused on strengthening the role of municipalities in BC's DRIPA action plan, including more support and resources. And so I think it's a very smart move for us to support. I didn't hear anyone speak in opposition to it. It seemed to be a unanimously supported decision, including a number of staff who were there. So happy that this is being brought forward by the co-chair, Councillor Boyle. Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. Up to 5 for debate.
Yeah, thanks. I actually have an amendment to propose. If you'd like to move us to an amendment queue.
Okay, we need a seconder first to move over. So
An email to Council.
okay, I'm just looking here. Perhaps the clerks can.
It was just sent because we're moving quite quickly.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm happy to second, Mayor.
Okay, thanks very much. So we're on the queue here now. Amendment queue. Did you want to talk more to this, Councillor Kirby-Young?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, simple amendment, just sort of consistent with council protocol that typically when council is endorsing or making a decision, it becomes sort of a statement or a position of the body of council. And so in following protocol, just simple amendments to be consistent with that protocol and signal all of council's support for this effort. And so it changes the language to, and you can see in bold there, the additional new language that council requests the mayor. And it says further to a motion from the UNDRIP task force. That further to a motion should be bolded. My apologies. To write a letter expressing support and replacing the co-chair writing the letter, but so that it has the full weight of the city and council's support behind it, and in support of the motion that was taken by the UNDRIP task force.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dejanova?
I appreciate what Councillor Kirby-Young is trying to do here and to keep processes in line, although this is a committee that is co-chaired by a member of MST and Councillor Boyle. And Councillor Boyle did the heavy lifting here and wrote this motion, worked with them to I would assume take in not only their feedback and how she's drafted this. I know that they have seen this and they're supportive of it, as she has said. But because she has done that work, I do think that it is appropriate, considering the circumstance, that this isn't on behalf of council, technically. It also involves the UNDRIP task force that she is named in the letter and has the ability to write that letter. So for that reason, I'm not able to support the amendment at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Boyle?
Thanks. I'll just say I don't actually really care who writes the letter, and I'm sort of confused as to why this. I mean, I'm just indifferent to who writes this letter. The point isn't that, and had, as Councillor DiGenova just mentioned, drafted this pretty last minute in conversation with the both the task force and the other co-chair, and assumed that it coming from me as co-chair of that task force sort of brought the voice of the task force as support, which is who council has delegated to lead this work. So again, it really feels like a insignificant change either way, but wanted to explain that this really wasn't about centering myself in any way, just that that's where the direction was coming from. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Carr?
Great, thanks, Mayor. I just sent in an amendment, and that.
Happy to second also, Mayor.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I'm sorry, I'm just trying to bring it up. I'm unfortunately sent so fast.
Okay, I'm just moving us to a queue, so go ahead, because it was seconded. Councillor Carr, go ahead to the amendment.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Point of procedure, Mayor?
Yes, Councillor DeGenova?
I don't see the amendment in my inbox. For
Yeah,
Councillor
you
Carr,
know,
and
I
got it.
actually did.
I'm sorry, I'm asking. I was just asking.
Yeah.
I didn't see it. So if
It
you
was
could tell me
sent
when
at,
it was sent.
it was just sent at 12:08. So
Thank you very much. I just wanted to know what I was reading. Thank you.
no problem.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, and actually, Councillor DeGenova, I may have the same problem you have because I don't seem to be getting new inbox things. So anyway, all I did was added back in language that it would be the mayor on behalf of council and Councillor Boyle as co-chair of the City of Vancouver that would write the letter. So it would be a joint letter, and I think it has the power, therefore, of representing all of council, which I think is very important, and I appreciate that amendment by Councillor Kirby-Young, but also recognizes that the group as a whole, and in terms of the City of Vancouver task force, also agreed to this. So that's my simple amendment.
Thank you. Councillor DeGenova to the amendment
I support this. I think that it has it would help to remove the dilemma if anyone felt there was one, that this wasn't going through the proper channels in coming from the mayor on behalf of council, but also acknowledging that it actually may cause confusion if Councillor Boyle is not named on here and is not a part of this letter, considering the work she has done and the work that she will be doing as co-chair of the task force. So I just wanted to voice my support for this as well.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the amendment. I'm just trying to keep us consistent on procedure here, and we normally don't. I heard a lot. That's important to me in terms of transparency and procedural consistency. And I heard conflictual statements. You know, one councillor saying this isn't on behalf of council. Then I asked, why is council voting on it? I heard another councillor say, well, the work has been delegated to this committee, but the committee still has to bring recommendations and that back forward to council. We don't have other committees and task forces where we have had chairs, whether they're chairs or co-chairs, that have written letters and so on. And so we have pretty established procedures around these things. And so I'm just noting, if we're going to differ for this, then I would expect that we would do so for the other committees that we have also that are coming forward, because I'm a big fan of consistency and transparency and governance. And I think that was the spirit of this here. It wasn't about any individual or otherwise, but it just seems inconsistent on a lot of levels to me. And I think that the public appreciates it when we have that transparency. I think we have a challenge. I will say, having this motion on the floor without, although council, I think, are very familiar with the principles of this and supportive of the principle of doing the work, but without having minutes from the meeting, without having a copy of this report, without having been advised of which members from the nations were constituted on the committee, without having any information online about the UNDRIP task force or the meetings when they're taking place, or ability for anybody to watch participate in them. There's a lot of flying blind here, and I'm trying to sort of shore us up in terms of having, you know, really good, defensible, consistent protocol and transparency into the work that we are doing. So that was the spirit behind this, and I hope that council will, you know, sort of appreciate and consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else on the queue, so I'm going to call a vote on this amendment to the amendment. Councillors Swanson, Weave, and Kirby-Young. Councillors Weave. Great, that passes, thank you, with Councillor Kirby-Young in opposition. Now we're going to go back to the amendment queue. Councillor Carr, anything else? You have 4.5 minutes.
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dejanova, you have 4 minutes.
I wanted to note that to the amended amendment, I now can support it. I said before I wouldn't support it, but the change in language has changed that for me. So I wanted to clarify that I will be supporting this now.
Great, thank you. We can call a vote on this amended amendment now. Just get the clerks to clear. Yep, there we go. And that has passed unanimously. Thank you, Council. Councillor Kirby-Young, anything else on this?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So clerks, I believe we need one more vote on this one. Just get you to clear the pass queue there. There we go. Okay, Council, this is amended amendment. Councillor Carr. Thanks, that's passed unanimously. Thank you, Council. Okay, so we'll go back to the Councillor Boyle, did you have anything else under new business?
No, I do not. Just a thanks to council for supporting that urgent motion.
Thank you. I also have a motion that I've circulated to council. I'm just wondering if Councillor Boyle would take over as deputy mayor while I introduce this.
Yes, of course, happy to, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay, council, so you've heard the FIFA World Cup stuff in the news. This is a motion that you would support me entering into discussions with provincial and federal governments, FIFA and host nations to further explore this. It is something that
Councillor DeGenova.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to say a little more if the chair.
Yes, yes, thanks. I will, I guess, move us. Well, we're on the right queue. Please just continue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so council, the Canada agreed with Mexico and the United States to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup. I think up to 10 games in Canada. It's a bit complicated, but Pavco is owns the BC Place Stadium, and it's the only venue that's suitable for hosting World Cup games in British Columbia. Early in 2017, it was made pretty clear by the provincial government that there wasn't an interest in hosting games, and so that left Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton as the three cities that were considering hosting games. Montreal pulled out earlier this month because of cost implications for their city, perhaps up to $1 billion to refit their stadiums. So that has the premier then raised the possibility of this coming back to Vancouver. However, there's a couple of things that are really important for us to know is the agreement would need to be signed by the city, and so that would come back through us. And there is a significant requirements for us. For example, it's not only hosting the games, there may be events prior to and post the World Cup matches. However, there could be up to a 30-day festival that we'd be required to host. All of that can lead to significant costs of tens of millions of dollars. So I thought it best if this is actually a serious consideration that I actively enter into these talks to make sure that reconciliation is at the heart of any proposal that we would consider, and that we protect ourselves from what happened to us during the Olympics, where we got saddled with a bunch of costs, and really that should be borne by the provincial and federal government. So all that being said, this is not a yes, it's a we're interested, but I need support from council just so I can speak with some authority to these bodies. So happy to answer questions if you have them. But that's the whole nature of this, and it's happening very quickly, so that's why I put it under new business today.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Councillor DiGenova, you are next on the list.
Thanks very much. I have some comments in support, but I was also hoping, Chair, if I could ask a point of information through Mayor Stewart, if that was possible.
That is possible. Go ahead and ask the point of information, and then I can direct it.
Thanks. I do have two. My point of information is a question for Mayor Stewart as to whether or not
sorry, Councillor DiGenova, sorry to interrupt for a moment. I'm just going to ask that the clerks advance you on the queue and start your timer, just so.
Okay. Can we start everyone's timers too? Thanks.
Yes, I don't have the panel.
I know, I understand. Thank you.
Go right ahead.
Great. So my point of information, Mayor Stewart, is for public knowledge. Have you spoken with our staff specifically in sport hosting, or had any comment back from them or the city manager that this would be something that staff could undertake? This is work that we currently could undertake and actually have a department and dedicated staff for this at the City of Vancouver. Just wanted to confirm that.
I have spoken extensively. Again, this kind of caught us a little by surprise. I think it was last week when this is announced. So I have spoken with the city manager, who actually raised the issue of indemnification for us, and I did get a briefing from Sport Hosting on this. So the thing is, most of the work now is for me in my office, with some support and expertise, but I don't think this will be onerous work unless actually it's coming, and then it's a lot more work, and that would be coming back to council for decision. So it's just to kind of what's going on. How are we involved? Yeah,
I just wanted to make sure for public record that we do have those kind of staff. We wouldn't need to
absolutely
go hire this kind of staff.
We have the best staff.
Also, I know we do, and a shout out to Michelle Collins and her team. But also just wanted to ask, if I may, Chair, another point of information. They'll let you direct. Again, it was intended to be a question for Mayor Stewart, and it's when we had the last FIFA championship here in Vancouver, the Women's World Cup, we had opportunities for underprivileged youth, and I really appreciate the lens of reconciliation that's been put on here. I'm not proposing an amendment, but would you envision those same opportunities being available to underprivileged, vulnerable, and marginalized communities, and especially youth, to benefit from this?
Yeah, I don't know a lot of what's included in the packages or what comes yet. That's the information I'm hoping to get from FIFA and senior governments, but absolutely youth should be the center of this, and would definitely add that informally at this point. If there was some formal condition that the city wanted to add on to our participation, then definitely entertain that. That's a good suggestion.
Thanks. And entertain, no pun intended, is what I was going to say when John Horgan, actually our premier, said those words. But I do want to thank the mayor for bringing this motion forward. It's something that I will support, and I urge council, when I brought forward a motion on hosting a future Olympic Games, Winter Olympic Games, and appreciated the mayor's support and dedication to that too, and what he's done to move that forward as well. I said we should leave no stone unturned for economic opportunities in our city, and that includes social enterprise and opportunities that could benefit not only, and I agree, it has to 100%. It's a non-starter if our nations aren't involved, if MST is not involved, but also there has to be benefit for the most marginalized and vulnerable people in our communities. And when we see what that is, then we can decide if that's enough. But if we don't move forward, we'll never see what could have been and the possibilities there. So I do appreciate this. And just as I said then, I would support more of this. I'm supporting this with my vote, and I'm crossing my fingers and very hopeful. Also have to say, just throwing it in there as a proud Italian Canadian, just on the heels of the Euro World Cup and Italy's win. So we don't have to go all the way back years and years ago. We have a recent win. I have to say that I think there was a lot of celebration, and it was nice to see, especially as we move forward with this restart phase. So leave no stone unturned for opportunities for our city. And if we do, another city will pick this up. I think that we owe this to the residents of Vancouver, and by that I mean all of the residents of Vancouver, to see what we can do to bring this to Vancouver. So thank you, Mayor Stewart. I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor DiGenova. Councillor Kirby-Young, you're up next.
Thanks, Chair. I have a simple amendment.
Okay. And I see it's on the screen and was circulated to council. If there's a seconder, then I'm happy to move us to an amendment queue.
Second.
Great, thank you, Mayor Stewart. So I'll ask the clerks to move us to an amendment queue and have you speak to it then, Councillor Kirby-Young.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's a simple amendment, and it's an acknowledgement that in addition to the very significant community sort of spirit building and community development efforts, as well as sport development for younger people in sport and up and coming athletes and supporting that, that large events like this can have. They also are a tremendous benefit to our beleaguered tourism industry that has been so decimated and hard hit by the pandemic. And with all of the large major events that the city has hosted, from Olympics to FIFA to others, and I'm naming Tourism Vancouver specifically here, and I think it's important to recognize them. They are usually very instrumental in bids and ensuring that a host city can provide all of the necessary support, and that often includes things like identifying hotel room blocks, looking at the calendar of events relative to other events, ensuring that other large events, conferences, planning, et cetera, are planned around that, so as to sort of facilitate enabling attention to that one and inventory in the city. And so for that reason, I wanted to recognize that traditionally large sort of the group of key partners around the event have included Tourism Vancouver, and I think it's really important that we work with them closely moving forward on these opportunities, as we did in terms of bringing the Formula E opportunity forward, which is now happening next year, and also in considering FIFA for 2026. So that's the spirit of the amendment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirby-Young, and I don't see any other speakers to the amendment, so I'll ask the clerk to move us to a vote on the amendment. I was on mute, sorry. That passes with no councillors in opposition. So thank you for that, Council. We'll move back to the original queue. Councillor Kirby-Young, did you have more to add?
No, I'm fine, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And clerks, it looks to me, I thought I remembered one other person on this queue, but it looks like there are no more councillors, so we can move to a vote on the amended motion. And that passes unanimously. Thank you, Council, and Mayor, I'll hand the chair back to you.
Thank you so much. Just looking here now, we're still under new business, so I'm just going to the correct queue, which I have as the question queue. Councillor Dejanova, I think.
No, that's a holdover, Mayor.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Kirby Young under new business, up to 5.
I do have one for inquiries, so should I hold that?
Yeah, let's finish the new business now and then move to inquiries and other matters. Councillor Swanson? No, okay. So it looks like we're done new business, so we can go to inquiries now. Councillor Dejanova, and I just put the timer on for 5 minutes, so please go ahead.
Thanks very much. This is a question. I'm not sure. I suppose you'll direct it, Mayor Stewart. I was hoping for it to be directed to the clerk or the city manager. But at a recent public hearing, although I was on the phone, I could, as I had noted in an email to the clerk, I could not have my video on at that time as the restart plan has started. My childcare situation, I can't really secure it for 18 hours some days in September. That will be different. My issue is that I was not absent. I was marked as present. I was there for roll call. I was acknowledged. And then I was not able to speak and I was not called for the vote. So I'm just wondering, I'm not pointing out that specific situation just to ask about that, but I was hoping that there could be some information that could be sent to all councillors, a memo perhaps, as to the exact procedure as to how we deal with this if someone who has been marked present is not there for the vote, because I've actually been at meetings where we've waited 10 minutes or more to call a councillor before, and I'm not saying that I'm being afforded anything different, but at a public hearing, we're in a quasi-judicial body, so I just want to make sure that we are very clear on the procedures of how we allow councillors to be absent and how they have to note that they're absent if they leave.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dejanova. I can tell you the first place we'll look at this is at the next chairs meeting, just to we can review this and see what happened and see if there's other procedures. I'm just wondering if the city manager or clerk would like to add anything here.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Stewart. We're certainly happy to follow up with a memo to council outlining the procedures as we understand them. That's not a problem.
Maybe we'll wait for the memo and then we can discuss the memo at the chairs meeting.
And
So.
I just wanted to note that I in no way am noting that I'm treated different than others, although I have seen different variations of this, and I also understand how hard it can be to chair a meeting after a very long day. But I do want to make sure that as we move forward, I think that this is also a legal issue as we sit in public hearing as a quasi-judicial body. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Swanson, up to 5.
I have 3 inquiries. The first one is, a while back we got a memo on the renoviction and demoviction motion that passed in October, but the memo didn't deal with some important parts of that motion, namely the parts of having staff report back on how to, if the city could do things to make it so people who are reno or demo evicted could get put into new places at the same rent and have the right of refusal in the new place at the same rent. And so my question is, when will we see some actions on these parts of the motion, or does staff consider that work completed? That's the first inquiry.
The city manager?
Yes, thanks. So we have been, as council was apprised in the memo, the province has recently introduced new provisions in the Residential Tenancy Act that we have been working to make sure that we understand how they're going to be applied. So no, I take the point that the work as requested in the memo has not been completed, and I would concur with that. So that is a report back that council can anticipate. I don't have a specific timeline for council at this point, but I can follow up on that.
Okay, thanks. The second one is, a little while ago, when council passed a motion about the process on the decriminalizing poverty motion, there was an amendment that also passed asking VPD for a second report delving deeper into the report they already gave council and providing full financial picture of how much they spend dealing with homelessness, drug use, sex work, and mental health and mental illness. So I'm wondering, has this request been made to the VPD, and is there a way of getting them to actually do that?
City Manager?
Councillor, yes, there's beyond conveying the request, there is no additional steps that staff are able to take. Obviously, the police board, as council is aware, is independent. So that request has been made. Our understanding in the interaction that we've had with the police is that they do believe that they have responded to that request. So that's the current state.
That they spent $283 last year on homelessness. Okay, the third inquiry is, so I just wanted to recognize the tragic death of Jared Lowndes, an Indigenous man who was shot in Campbell River by RCMP on July 8th. His mother, Laura Holland, has been really active in Vancouver, supporting missing and murdered women and safe spaces for sex workers. And the First Nations Leadership Council is calling for justice and a review of the RCMP action in this because of the death. So what my inquiry is, do staff have an idea of what we can do to support Jared's mother?
Councillor, yeah, I'm not familiar, obviously, other than reading the media reports of that case, not familiar with the circumstances. Obviously, it's well outside our jurisdiction. There is a provincial process, of course, for investigation of serious injuries and fatalities involving police, which I expect will play itself out in this particular case. That is an independent process. So I don't, as far as I understand, there isn't a role for council to play in that. Obviously, if there's an advocacy effort here that council is looking to undertake with the province around that process, generally, that's something that is within council's discretion. But at this time, I don't have any other suggestions for council in terms of action on that particular incident.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Councillor Carr, inquiries and other matters.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I have one inquiry and one other matter. Regarding the inquiry, it arises from correspondence I've received from the office of MLA Spencer Chandra Herbert. And this is regarding the lack of public washrooms in the West End, specifically around Denman Street, noting that the issue has become even more significant and egregious with the heat over the last while. There's been a lot of problem with increased human waste and urine in the alleys around Nelson and Denman. And the concern that it has become a health issue, as well as the fact that the heat has increased it to becoming quite a difficult odor issue. And noting that we should be considering the health and dignity of residents and many people who simply don't have access to a public washroom in that area. There's one up in the JV Village, but not at the west part in the downhill area, specifically along Denman. So my question really to the city manager, I think, is what is the process that we would go through as a council and as a city to actually put in place washrooms, public washrooms, and specifically even through difficult time periods like the period of very intense heat that we've been facing in the city?
Thanks, Councillor. So we have, as Council may recall, done a lot of work around through the course of the pandemic around making additional washroom facilities available. And we have 5 temporary washroom facilities that have been funded through federal government funding that are now set up and running, not in the West End. We did, though, in partnership with the Park Board, did increase throughout COVID the hours of operation of the washrooms, both at English Bay and Sunset Beach. Park Board, as council knows, operates the vast majority of public washrooms in the city, and so they really are the key delivery agent here. One of the main challenges in the West End in particular was the closure of the community center that now is reopened. So that facility is available. Of course, it's not 24/7. The issue of public washrooms in the city is a really, really challenging one, and we've had previous discussion and direction from council on that. It's an issue that we're looking to tackle systemically, and because there are needs definitely in the downtown core, downtown east side, and the west end is another area. So, at this point, the good news is that the community center is now accessible to the public. That the beach, washrooms at the parks are open, and again, Park Board has maintained extended hours for those. Beyond that, there's work underway with a report coming back to council. Again, don't have a specific timeline for you, but on a kind of the broader issue of public washroom access in the city, and acknowledging that that is a systemic problem that we're challenged with.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I would appreciate getting that report. Noting also that the Weston and Denman in particular gets a lot of increased foot traffic during the summer months in particular. So I think a public washroom, notwithstanding that, of course, there is a community center, but in the evenings when there is, the streets can be very crowded, is probably, in my mind, should be one of the priorities. So thanks for that. And my other item is just other matter, and it really is to acknowledge that next week is the launch of Pride Week within Vancouver. And I know we're raising flags at City Hall on Monday, but there will be sort of a week-long set of activities. And for me, that's always been a real highlight of the year. I don't know, it's been 15 years or so that I've walked, except the last summer, walked in the Pride Parade, and really miss that event a lot. But there will be a virtual Pride event, and not just many events. And I'm going to encourage people to go to the Vancouver Pride Society website, which is vancouverpride.ca, to look up the details of those activities and participate wherever possible, and really, give a huge boost of support to the GLBTQ2+ community in our city, which is so vibrant. So happy Pride, everyone.
Thanks. Councillor Kirby-Young, up to 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of inquiries. The first one is just given that this is our last council meeting before September in the fall time, I wonder if the city manager could advise, I know the public's interested, just what the new procedures are for the public participating in and attending council meetings. I think I've had several inquiries. Will council be back in chambers, for example, and the public attend in person? Will we be able to continue to attend? Will they be able to continue to speak online as well as in person? So why don't we just signal to the public what to expect when we come back in September?
Certainly. So to confirm that the public is able to attend council in chambers now, so that with the removal of the capacity restrictions, that allowance is now available. In terms of for the public continuing to participate electronically, we are anticipating that. We are waiting for some regulatory changes from the province. We haven't seen them yet. We know they're working on them. So our expectation is that, and again, it's also subject to then council making corresponding changes to the procedure bylaw, which we would be bringing forward a report for council's consideration in September. So at this point in time, we are expecting that mechanism, if council is interested to maintain it, that it would be available legally to us. So yeah, we're in a bit of a transition period here, coming out of the Emergency Program Act orders that enabled kind of our current method of operation into what will be the ongoing kind of way of doing business that we're still defining. So that will be on council's agenda for your September meeting, is a update to the procedure bylaw to address this piece.
Okay, thanks. And then quick follow-up on that. The other piece of that is, can the public expect to see council back in chambers and actually see us? I get asked that a lot.
Yep. Certainly, that's what we're anticipating at this point. Council, again, it will be council's decision ultimately on what kind of configuration. Again, assuming the province permits council to continue to operate in a virtual way, that's an option that's open to council. But for September, we're expecting that staff and council would be back in the chamber.
Great, thank you so much. That was my first inquiry. My second one was a question that I had asked at the July 6th council meeting, and that was affirmation with the provincial changes and lifting restrictions that street performers and buskers can resume in the city of Vancouver. I know that staff did follow up, and we got a memo last Friday that said an answer was still in progress, but given that we're about to break for summer and it's summer busking season, it's not that long. They try to make hay while the sun shines. I'm getting follow-ups of people asking for confirmation that they can start moving forward their busking activities without fear of getting ticketed or approached because they're not permitted. So do we have any update on that?
Yeah, and sorry for the delay on that, Councillor. I do understand your point around the time sensitivity of that. I will follow up with staff and expedite that answer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Dejanova, just 2.5 minutes left.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to note, if I may, Mayor Stewart, that I'd already sent in that question that Councillor Carr had mentioned, because MLA Spencer Chandra Herbert's office had also reached out to me, and I understand from staff that it's already in the works and will be relayed through the council roundup and questions. So I just wanted to note that, so work wasn't duplicated in any way. I'm sure that there's a way to streamline that, but I also just wanted to note that that inquiry had been made by me on Friday. Thanks.
Great, thanks. I don't see anybody else for questions, so we can have a motion to adjourn. It is 12:42, so we convene in camera at 1:45, say, to give us a full hour for lunch. And I have a motion to adjourn on the floor. Councillor Dejanova, seconder.
Second, we.
Thanks. All in favor, say yay.
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 Opposed, nay. Thanks. So we're adjourned. Clerks, is there anything else that we need to do?
No, we're all good.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you in camera shortly. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. That was great.